Jong Yu was once a premier attorney at a major South Korean firm, but he unexpectedly woke up one day to find himself transported back to the Stone Age. He was forced to live among primitive cavemen every day, swallowing frogs and rodents to avoid starvation, while lamenting the lack of a smartphone to watch videos at night. He thought he had been given a protagonist's destiny, but his life after transmigration was miserable, especially after a saber-toothed tiger suddenly attacked his family one night. The group was scattered in the chaos, leaving only him and a stout older man to begin their journey of prehistoric survival together. Every morning, the man woke him using physical force, delivering punches with the strength of an elephant that nearly sent him to the afterlife. Using nothing but his bare hands and hard stones, the stout man began crafting hunting tools, leaving Jong Yu speechless at the sheer power of prehistoric humans. A sharp stone knife was soon completed, and the next morning the two of them headed into the forest with their equipment as the stout man signaled toward the sky. As they set off, Jong Yu followed the man's lead, having begun to understand the primitive way of communicating before they eventually hid behind a boulder to watch a flock of goats grazing. Jong Yu immediately understood the plan, yet he wondered why they weren't capturing the goats while the animals remained unaware of the danger. As the sky turned crimson with the setting sun, Jong Yu let out a loud yawn, but the stout man quickly covered his mouth and signaled for him to stay quiet. After the goats had eaten and settled onto the grass, Jong Yu's empty stomach began to growl, making him wonder when the hunt would finally start as the man remained unresponsive. It wasn't until nightfall that a fire flickered in the cave, where Jong Yu and the man sat warming themselves while roasting worms on a thick stone slab. The stout man carefully blew on the food to cool it down before handing it to him, and Jong Yu forced himself to eat to regain his energy. He couldn't understand these people, especially since the man's sack was filled with stones that could have easily been used to secure better food given his strength. Jong Yu questioned why they were eating insects when they could have simply used those stones to hunt like other primitive men. The man noticed his behavior, but despite Jong Yu's constant reminders and hand gestures pointing toward the meat, he refused to give up. Unexpectedly, the stout man just stood there in a daze, his indifferent attitude leaving Jong Yu frustrated by the lack of understanding. Even so, the man still cared for him and offered another piece of food, but Yu shook his head in dissatisfaction, insisting he wanted meat until the next morning arrived. He and the stout man left the cave at dawn, and Jong Yu wore a bright smile, confident that today would be the day of the real hunt. The man placed his hand on an ordinary tree and began striking it with a sharp stone, an absurd action that caused Jong Yu to groan in exasperation. Jong Yu sat down, unable to fathom the purpose of this task or why he was suddenly dealing with a tree. Furthermore, the stout man pounded incessantly while he struggled to carry one end of the trunk, complaining about the heavy weight. Sunlight flooded the area outside the shop as the man diligently stripped the bark, while Jong Yu's drowsy eyes remained fixed on his unanswered questions. He wondered what the man was creating, as carving bark with stones was a way of life for the stout fellow, who suddenly turned to tell him to wait. Jong Yu didn't understand what was happening and watched the stout man walk away, wondering where he was going now that a long strip of bark had been removed. Curious, Jong Yu approached and sniffed the air as colorful stones tumbled from a sack, though the man's search remained a mystery. Jong Yu lay there observing the situation, questioning the purpose of the stones and the man's next move, while the stout fellow worked with intense focus. The man split a yellow stone in two and handed a piece to Jong Yu to try, requiring great effort from him to break it while the man resumed scraping. Jong Yu continued crushing the stones, no longer grumbling about the seemingly pointless task as the colorful fragments were neatly organized. Jong Yu shouted to show off his progress, but the stout man merely glanced back and demanded more, leaving him feeling utterly speechless. Jong Yu frantically smashed the assigned stones, wondering what the ultimate goal was and how much more the man could possibly need. He cursed the fact that he was sweating and exhausted despite being in a dream, while the natural landscape was bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. The hard stones had been reduced to fine powder, earning Jong Yu a commendatory pat on the head before he collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. While the stout man continued his diligent carving, Jong Yu nearly drifted off but suddenly bolted upright, wondering where the man had gone as he touched a wooden spearhead. He found himself admiring the man's craftsmanship, though he was startled by the sheer size of the object, questioning if it was perhaps a bit too long. Hearing what sounded like the stout man weeping outside, he felt the situation was indeed pitiable, but he stopped short upon noticing a flickering torch. He stared intently as the stout man dipped his fingers into orange powder to draw the initial lines on the stone, with yellow hues adding warmth to the scene he watched. The man added blue to the mural, recreating images of primitive people dancing around a fire, revealing that he possessed deep emotions of his own. His eyes glistened as he looked at the colorful depictions of primitive people on the wall, serving as a reminder that family is never forgotten. As Dawn returned to the shop, the stout man used 2 fingers to apply orange pigment to Rong Yu's forehead, and then his own, signifying their bond. The fat man believed they were of the same tribe, like family. Looking into the pitch-black cave, Rong Yu had unconsciously fallen asleep, even drooling. The fat man stripped the rough bark as the sun rose over the mountain peak. Only then did he finally stretch and let out a long yawn. Exhausted from overwork, he remained sprawled out to catch up on sleep. Misunderstanding the situation, Rong Yu thought the fat man was dim-witted and becoming lazy. He let out a mocking smile. After all, there was no need for diligence in this state, and it wasn't as if he had anything important to do. It seemed Rong Yu had discovered something. He looked curiously at the handmade spear, wondering why it had suddenly become shorter. Unbeknownst to him, the fat man had already woken up. "This is for you." Full of energy at the start of the day, he urged, "Let's go." The two went to the stream to wash up, where the fat man also drank his fill. Rong Yu imitated the primitive way of scooping water with cupped palms. He noticed a green frog sunbathing on a large rock. It didn't seem panicked by the human's gaze, as Rong Yu's friendly appearance masked his dark intentions. "Hello, little frog, don't worry. We'll have meat to eat today." The fat man used the new spear to help him scale the cliff. They carried their tools into the forest, where the goats grazed daily. He signaled for the fat man to follow his lead. "Aim for that one." Today, the man seemed to understand Rong Yu perfectly as he prepared to hurl the spear. With a single, simple motion, the goat was brought down by his spear. He raised his hand in satisfaction. "One shot, 1 kill. Excellent." While the fat man stood there dazed, Rong Yu immediately volunteered to make the difficult climb. "Let me get it." He couldn't afford to hesitate for even a second. He rushed toward the goat, unaware that the situation was about to change. "Wait, what's that?" A massive bird with sharp claws landed, and he tried to chase it as his food was snatched away. Rong Yu couldn't accept this harsh reality. "No!" He gripped the spear shaft tightly, and just like that, he was hoisted off the ground by the bird. He couldn't help but panic. "Damn it!" At that moment, the fat man arrived to save him. "Hold on tight." He lunged forward and grabbed Rong Yu. The two of them were actually suspended in midair. The spear tip through the goat's belly seemed secure, but unexpectedly, it suddenly tore free. The fat man's back hit the ground while he and Rong Yu clung to the spear. Using his sturdy frame to shield Rong Yu, they tumbled several times before slamming into a rock. The fat man and Rong Yu looked toward the sky with regretful eyes. They were cursing the bird that had stolen their meal for the day. "You bastard." 2 streaks of tears rolled down his cheeks. "That was ours. It belonged to us." As the sun began to set, the landscape was bathed in a deep orange hue. He persistently threw the spear at the herd, but the goats managed to escape in time. The fat man couldn't believe his eyes, while Rong Yu stood there in silence. The memory of the man rescuing Rong Yu resurfaced, only just now coming back to him. He realized the youth must have been wounded earlier. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the two returned from an exhausting but fruitless hunt, too dejected to even exchange a word. Seeing the little frog still perched on the rock, he caught it at once and apologized for failing to keep his promise. The stout man quickly skewered the frogs while Rong Yu and the elder diligently gathered more for dinner. As they roasted over the red embers, he eagerly took a large bite. Rong Yu didn't utter a single complaint as darkness enveloped the cave entrance. He began painting on the stone wall with pigments, leaving the man stunned when he illuminated it with his torch. Rong Yu pointed to himself after drawing a large bullseye on the wall. The man seemed to grasp the idea as Rong Yu prepared to hurl his spear with all his might. The spear was deflected, prompting the man to personally instruct Rong Yu to aim a bit higher until the tip struck very close to the center of the target. Torchlight drove the shadows from the cave, while the moon and stars watched over the night sky. Meanwhile, wild beasts began to harass a small hut built atop an ancient tree. The creatures made constant noise to lure those inside, prompting the tribesmen to fix a sharp stone blade to a wooden shaft. The thin man gripped it firmly, trying to chase the beasts away. One evening inside the cave, Rong Yu sat lost in thought, wondering if this was more than just a dream since every sensation felt so incredibly real. Recalling the moment he plunged into the deep water, Rong Yu reflected on the agonizing pain that had made him feel as though he were on the verge of death. He wondered if a sudden, intense shock would return him to his original state, but when he touched the flames, he could only cry out in pain at the searing heat. With tears welling in his eyes, he realized this method was useless. After that foolish attempt, Rong Yu reconsidered, knowing that whether it was a dream or reality, things would eventually change. He would eventually wake up without needing to endure such extreme pain, and he began to appreciate the beauty of this place, viewing it as a primitive vacation in the heart of nature. This realization lifted Rong Yu's spirits as he escaped his work stress. Yet he still worried about his upcoming lawsuit and what he should do next. Meanwhile, at a certain dwelling, inside the shelter built upon a tree branch lay piles of fresh, delicious meat, while a pack of wolves barked incessantly on the ground below. The thin man used his spear to drive them off, shouting for them to leave, but the wolves continued their attempt to scale the tree as he anxiously searched for a solution. The thin man observed the pack and suddenly let out a soft chuckle before eventually falling into a deep sleep. As more meat accumulated around the dwelling, another day quietly passed and a new one began. Feeling utterly dejected under the blazing sun, Rong Yu signaled to the stout man that there was nothing to do today and they should simply move on. The man immediately raised his spear and struck a nearby animal with a single perfect throw, bringing a smile to Rong Yu's face as they celebrated having meat to eat. Upon returning to the cave, they hung their prize up in triumph. The fat man told him to pay attention and watch, then used a sharpened stone to skin the creature while he observed the process intently. After struggling for a long time, the fat man finally finished skinning the animal and washed the hide in the stream, leaving Rong Yu wondering why the skin mattered. He thought the meat was the priority, but the man simply stretched the hide out to hang before finally slicing the meat into thin strips. He wondered if the meat had been sliced too thin. Then Rong Yu carried the meat to the stream where the man stuffed it back into the hide. After finishing at the stream, they brought the product back to the cave, and Rong Yu finally realized they were making a form of dried meat. The rest had to be preserved or else it would all go to waste, and Rong Yu marveled at the man's intelligence, wondering if he was truly a primitive human. Back at the cave, he happily bit into the meat alongside the fat man in a warm atmosphere until the man gazed up at the starry night sky. With tears in his eyes, the man made Rong Yu wonder why he went out to cry every night, appearing far more fragile than his size suggested. When he found him, the fat man was trembling before a drawing of a family, clearly overwhelmed by how much he missed them. Rong Yu gently comforted him, suggesting his family might still be alive, and eventually managed to persuade him to go rest. Rong Yu smiled and told him not to think about negative things anymore, satisfied to see that the man's heavy expression had finally lifted. Another night passed, and Rong Yu carved a mark on the cliff to count the days before bathing in the stream, while the man did laundry nearby. However, Rong Yu felt a sense of unease, questioning if this was truly okay, as another tally mark was added to the cave wall. While the fat man worked on the hide, Rong Yu recalled standing on a skyscraper, realizing that in this world, if you stop moving, you fall. His heart screamed that he was currently in a state of complete stagnation, reminding himself that this was no time for enjoyment. As the marks on the wall multiplied, Rong Yu was stunned to realize he had already spent 7 days living in this cave. He realized that including his time outside, it had been over 10 days, and he worried that being stuck here would ruin his upcoming lawsuit. If he stayed here, all his preparations would go to waste, so Rong Yu decided he would practice his legal arguments right there. Adopting the persona of a prehistoric lawyer, Rong Yu began a mock trial, arguing that Jair had followed all legal procedures for compensation. Therefore, we present the relevant contracts as conclusive evidence, while the plaintiff listens intently as Rong Yu continues his presentation. As you can see, the contract was finalized through Representative Kui Zakesun, making the plaintiff's claim of ignorance regarding the agreement entirely illogical and inconsistent. Watching him speak incessantly, the man couldn't fathom what he was trying to do until Rong Yu reached out toward the fat man to signal his intent. We request that Kui Zakesun be called as a witness, but the man just stared at him in total confusion, unable to grasp what was happening. Then the fat man drew closer, startling Rong Yu and making him wonder what was going on, before the man gave him a soulful look as if he understood everything Rong Yu had conveyed. However, Rong Yu was baffled by that expression and questioned its meaning, only for the fat man to unexpectedly pull him into a comforting embrace, while Rong Yu remained helplessly confused. After the consolation, the two sat by the wood stove to warm themselves, when the fat man suddenly patted Rong Yu's shoulder as if he had something to tell him. Looking at his face, one could only guess his thoughts. Indeed, to you, I am not lawyer Jin Rong Yu, but merely a useless youngest son. Rong Yu continued tending to the fire while the man kept speaking, telling him not to worry because he wasn't as incompetent as Rong Yu believed. Rong Yu then tasted the food he had just cooked over the flames, but the moment the meat hit his tongue, the shock of the flavor jolted his entire system. Rong Yu spat out the meat and lamented how hot it was, prompting the fat man to lean in and blow on the food to cool it down. Feeling somewhat comforted, Rong Yu managed a shaky smile, and by the next day, the sun began to set slowly over the cliffs. Emerging from the cave, Rongyu saw the fat man sitting outside lost in thought, and though he didn't ask, he seemed to understand the situation to some extent. Rongyu then quietly approached and sat beside the fat man, and the two of them watched the sunset together in silence. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a group of people appeared carrying food, unaware that a tiger was lurking on a tree branch, watching them closely. Suddenly, the tiger's eyes widened as it locked onto its target, while a man in the group felt a sudden chill down his spine, sensing that he was being watched. When the man turned around and spotted the beast, the tiger seized the moment to pounce and maul him relentlessly, causing him to scream in agony. The loud commotion caused the rest of the group to spin around in alarm, while the tiger let out a roar, eyeing the others with predatory hunger. It left the injured man behind and slowly advanced toward the others, who moved cautiously while keeping their eyes fixed on the tiger's every movement. The men dropped the deer they had just hunted and backed away slowly as the tiger approached the carcass, drawing within just a few paces of it. Unexpectedly, the tiger ignored the easy prey and lunged at the men instead, tearing into them one by one and tossing them aside. The tiger acted decisively, biting into the man's arm without hesitation and staining the forest floor with the tribesman's blood. After picking them off one by one, it departed with a deer as its prize, leaving the final survivor trembling in terror as he used his remaining strength to crawl toward home, though his wounds were severe and the blood continued to flow unchecked. Ultimately unable to endure any longer, he collapsed on the path, while the tiger finally returned to its lair after the hunt. As it approached, it saw something that made its eyes widen in shock. Its defenseless cubs lay dead upon the ground, driven to madness by the sight and the pain in its injured eye. It let out a thunderous roar as a group of armed men surrounded it. The men held their ground firmly, maintaining a steady defense until one brave soul charged forward, only for the tiger to leap over him and lunge at another man. Instead of attacking, it used the man's shoulder to spring high into the air and fled with all its might, leaving everyone in utter disbelief. It darted through the forest, weaving between trees as the men pursued relentlessly, while blood continued to stream from its wounded eye. Once it had outrun its pursuers, it stopped to gaze at the stars and let out a roar to vent its sorrow before spotting something in the woods and slowly approaching a cliffside. Below, a campfire flickered in a human settlement. Seeing this, the tiger rushed down and let out a cry as if finding sanctuary, while nearby, two people with fruit-stained faces looked at each other. They laughed at their messy appearances before Rongyu resumed picking the delicious wild fruit, which they both devoured hungrily. While eating, Rongyu noticed something strange. Trails of blood had appeared beneath his feet. Noticing Rongyu's intense stare, the fat man stopped eating and turned to look down at the ground with him. Startled by the presence of the blood, the two of them began to follow the trail to its source. The fat man urged Rongyu to hurry, and they both quickly followed the trail of blood. They arrived to find a flock of birds gathered, busily tearing away at something on the ground. Suddenly, a large bird appeared and kicked the others away, refusing to let them continue their scavenging. It intended to keep the carcass for itself, and the two onlookers were left speechless as they watched the bird sniff around. Frozen by the sight and unsure how to react, they eventually snapped out of it and moved forward to drive the birds away, shouting for them to get lost. The eagle, seeing them as intruders, flew toward the fat man to attack, but it was struck down and sent tumbling across the ground a second later. The two of them joined forces to successfully defeat the eagle, after which the fat man turned his gaze toward the distance. Seeing the man mangled beyond recognition, he had no choice but to search the body thoroughly to uncover his identity. After finishing his search, the fat man let out a long sigh and held up the man's hand for Rongyu to see. Recognizing the tribal bracelet, Rongyu realized the man was not one of their kin, so they worked together to dig a large pit. Once the digging was complete, they filled the grave with stones and placed a few flowers on top as a tribute. They raised their hands toward the sky in a final farewell to the man before returning to their own home. The flowers they had carefully picked were quite beautiful, yet they unexpectedly attracted several birds that came to investigate. Suddenly, a bird spotted a fly landing on the grave, prompting them to dig up the soil while the two men finally returned to their cave. Inside the cave, the fat man stared pensively at the flickering fire, and Rongyu could tell that he was deeply troubled. Overcome with emotion, the fat man buried his face in his hands, and after the cave fell silent, Rongyu eventually drifted into a deep sleep. He carried a torch to examine the ancient paintings, staring at them intently as he recalled the time he had shouted for everyone to flee for their lives. The fleeing villagers kept glancing back in terror at the predatory tiger, pursuing them until a child tripped, prompting someone to rush back and help her up. A man wielding a staff blocked the tiger's path to let the others escape, shouting for the woman to take the crying girl and leave immediately. These memories brought tears to the fat man's eyes as he wondered if she was still alive, though the paintings made him feel pessimistic. trembling with the fear that she might be dead. The fat man hurriedly packed his belongings to leave while Rong Yu remained asleep. The next morning, as sunlight filtered into the cave, he shook Rong Yu awake while the boy was still groggily yawning. The fat man handed him an unfamiliar bag, leaving Rong Yu confused until he opened it to find a large supply of food. Confused, Rong Yu looked at the fat man, who firmly declared they were going to find their family, leaving the boy bewildered by his sudden decision. The fat man insisted that Rong Yu accompany him, and though the boy tried to protest, he eventually asked for clarification once he was set down. He asked where they were going and how they would search, but the fat man didn't understand, leaving Rong Yu feeling utterly frustrated. Lacking a clear goal, Rong Yu began to inquire, saying, "Look here," as he sketched a diagram to guide them, explaining what would happen if they strayed too far. Furthermore, Rong Yu used his facial expressions to signal that it would be perilous and lead to death. Yet the fat man remained dazed and understood nothing. Unexpectedly, he continued to follow the man out of helplessness, unable to persuade him. So Rong Yu sought another way, realizing that life and death here were not his concern. Dying would simply mean returning to reality, and a painless, natural death here was preferable to the alternative. As the sunlight began to beam down upon them, Rong Yu surveyed his surroundings with no idea where to go, wondering about the nature of this path, and if he was returning to the place he had previously visited. Recalling those events, Rong Yu looked at the fat man in confusion as he watched the sun set, wondering why it was taking so long when it had previously only required half a day. After a very long time, they finally chose a spot to rest, where the fat man began using a wooden stick to start a fire, eventually producing smoke and blowing on the embers. As the fire gradually grew, they added more wood to strengthen the blaze, and the two of them ate in silence, far too exhausted to speak to one another. Rong Yu remained focused on his meal, oblivious to his surroundings and unaware of the numerous sounds echoing through the forest. Monkeys moved silently through the woods while Rong Yu drifted into a drowsy sleep. But when they curiously peered at him, the sight of them caused him to scream in terror. Turning around, he found himself surrounded by a troop of monkeys that had appeared out of nowhere, prompting him to shake the other man vigorously and urge him to wake up. The large man finally awoke and glared fiercely at the surrounding troop of monkeys, who were approaching the two of them with great curiosity. Rong Yu warily raised his bow toward the inquisitive monkeys, but the fat man quickly signaled for him to stop, whispering that the presence of small animals meant no predators. It was as if a light had been switched on in Rong Yu's mind, and he realized with wide eyes that the abundance of monkeys indeed meant there were no terrifying beasts around. Rong Yu glanced at the stout man with a look of pure admiration, as if he were a professor, and could not help but praise him for his intelligence. Having said that, the two of them lay back to rest and recover their strength, while a group of nearby monkeys grew curious about his orange bag and began to investigate it. Sensing his bag being moved, Rong Yu snapped his eyes open and quickly snatched it back, shouting no with a deep frown. Rong Yu carefully clutched the bag to his chest before slowly drifting off to sleep, and the next morning, he and the fat man resumed their journey. While trekking through the forest, Rong Yu discovered a strange creature and knelt down to gently pick it up, muttering to himself in confusion about what it could be. Holding the creature, Rong Yu looked toward the fat man and asked if he could keep it since it seemed lost, but the man suddenly roared for him to release it. Rong Yu muttered in annoyance, "What? Can you actually understand me?" As soon as he spoke, more of the creatures rushed out to block their path. They howled incessantly, appearing highly vigilant and prepared to strike if the pair harmed the small cub. Rong Yu swallowed hard, carefully placing the creature on the ground to let it rejoin its pack. The two then fled at top speed, with the fat man shouting that where there is a cub, a mother is bound to follow. Rong Yu panted heavily as he ran, his blood boiling as he thought the man was stating the obvious with far too much gravity. They eventually reached an open clearing under the scorching sun, yet the leopards continued their relentless pursuit. Rong Yu glanced back anxiously to assess the situation. He bit his lip, wondering why they were still chasing him when he had only touched the cub briefly before letting go. Having run for so long, he finally collapsed in exhaustion, gasping for air and tearfully whispering that he could go no further. Sweat poured down his face as Rong Yu bit his lip in regret, thinking he had made a grave error and was ready to say goodbye and return to reality. Resigning himself to fate, Rong Yu stood frozen in place and listlessly raised his hands in surrender, silently inviting death to take him. Suddenly, the fat man charged forward with his scythe to shield him, cutting down a leopard that had just lunged. He screamed out a defiant refusal. The other leopards hesitated and began to retreat slowly. Rong Yu stared at the fat man in a daze, clicking his tongue inwardly. He thought there was no need for such heroics, as he would simply return to reality upon death. Meanwhile, the aggressive leopards circled behind Rong Yu, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Seeing him distracted, one pounced, but the fat man swung his scythe just in time to intercept it. The others fearlessly swarmed the fat man, who nimbly spun his weapon to fend them off. One leopard seized the moment to leap at him while he was occupied. Realizing the fat man was about to be bitten, Rong Yu jumped up and struck the beast with his staff. He looked at the fat man and sighed. He realized that while he would only return to reality if he died, the fat man would face actual death. The two quickly coordinated, standing back to launch a counterattack. They fought until the sun dipped below the horizon, eventually thinning the pack by half. Suddenly, a voice called out from the distance, catching the attention of both the men and the leopards. They all turned toward the figure as a thin man wielding a scythe rushed toward them, shouting boldly that he had arrived to help. Rong Yu and the fat man were overcome with joy as the thin man swung his scythe at the leopards, yelling for them to get away. The three men quickly regrouped and faced the pack together. With a synchronized shout, they prepared to charge at the remaining beasts. However, the leopards did not move. One of them approached a fallen comrade, sniffed it, let out a long howl, and then turned to walk away. The rest of the pack followed suit, leaving the three men standing there with bewildered expressions. After a long moment, they were moved to tears. Overjoyed at their narrow escape, they embraced one another. As night fell, the thin man began preparing medicine to treat the fat man's wounds and stop his bleeding. He gently applied medicine to their bite wounds, while the thin man meticulously inspected the injuries to ensure nothing was overlooked. The fat man turned to ask Han Zhongyu with concern if he was injured, but Zhongyu remained silent, focused on the thin man tending to his wounds as memories of caring for his younger sister resurfaced. He had been just as gentle back then, smiling at her and saying it was finished, which prompted the little girl to give a radiant, gap-toothed grin that looked incredibly adorable. The three of them shared a tight embrace before drifting off to sleep, and the next morning they headed into the woods to hunt, beginning the day with renewed energy. As they huddled around a small fire, the fat man solemnly suggested they search for their families, a proposal the other two silently agreed with. At daybreak, they resumed their journey, but while they were splashing water on their faces at the river to refresh themselves, a pack of leopards unexpectedly emerged on the opposite bank. Cold, piercing eyes locked onto them, signaling imminent danger as the beasts let out a low growl, prompting Zhang Yu and the thin man to raise their scythes in defense. Suddenly, the thundering sound of approaching footsteps erupted from behind, causing the three to spin around in a panic, their eyes fixed tensely on the new threat. A herd of massive mammoths appeared in the distance, their earth-shaking roars throwing the scene into chaos as they closed in on the leopards, completely ignoring the three men. Seizing the rare chance to escape, the fat man shouted for them to move, and the three quickly fled the area before the scene shifted elsewhere. The fat man led the way to his village and shouted in joy that they had arrived, but the sight that met their eyes instantly struck them dumb with horror. The once peaceful village was now a wasteland of ruined huts and scattered corpses, leaving their faces etched with profound shock and fury. They rushed inside, desperately hoping to find survivors, but the fat man soon collapsed in grief, clutching a skeleton on the ground and crying out for his wife. The thin man fared no better, desperately embracing the skeletal remains of his wife while wailing in despair for his mother. While searching through the wreckage, Zhang Yu spotted a small scrap of fabric nearby and picked it up with trembling hands, forced to confront the grim reality. It was the skeleton of a child, and upon catching sight of it, the fat man collapsed in agony, screaming for his child as his overwhelming grief turned into a rage that drove him to smash a rock against the earth. They gathered the remains of their loved ones and dug graves with their bare hands, watching as handfuls of earth slowly covered the cold, dry bones. Eventually, 4 new graves stood in a neat row before them, and the 3 men stood in a heavy silence, consumed by a choking resentment and a vast, hollow emptiness. Suddenly, the thin man seemed to realize something and spoke up. 2 people were missing, and after a moment of silence, hope began to shine in their eyes as Rong Yu patted the fat man's shoulder. He smiled and said that their absence meant they were still alive, a belief that kindled like a new flame in hearts hardened by grief. They built graves and offered flowers and final goodbyes to the deceased, then sat quietly by the riverbank as dusk fell. Their fishing lines drifted in the crimson glow of the sunset, while a silent determination gleamed in their eyes before the thin man spoke up with a grin. He suggested they keep running until they left these fields to build a house in the trees, leaving the other 2 listening in awe. As the trio fished patiently along the bank, a large fish suddenly breached the surface, caught on the fat man's line. Rong Yu nudged the fat man to alert him, prompting a quick reel-in just before the thin man's line shook violently as another fish leaped out. Their cheers lightened the heavy atmosphere, yet Rong Yu sat watching with a sinking heart, muttering to himself about why he was the only one failing to catch anything. He observed the thin man and wondered if only primitive people possessed such specialized fishing skills, since they were using the same bait. Sensing Rong Yu's gaze, the thin man understood and pulled up his line to show him the small hook attached to the end. It was a revelation for Rong Yu, who watched as the thin man kindly prepared the bait for him and helped him cast the line. Rong Yu followed the instructions happily as his line hit the sunset-dappled water, which soon rippled with a sudden splash that made all three men grab the rod. They pulled together with intense excitement until a massive golden fish burst from the water, scattering shimmering droplets in the sunlight. Overjoyed as if he had found gold, Rong Yu marveled at the beauty of nature, while the three of them gathered around a fire as night fell. Despite the fragrant aroma of grilled fish, their hearts remained heavy until the fat man broke the silence, declaring they should fight instead of running in fear. The thin man replied solemnly that resistance would have meant certain death, while Rong Yu remained silent as memories of screams, rain, and blood flooded his mind. Returning to the present by the fire, a restless Rong Yu whispered to himself, wondering if things would be different had he taken action. The flickering flames and the surrounding remains of their loved ones seemed to answer him with a cold denial of that desperate flight. Rong Yu shook his head in frustration and bit his lip, telling himself to stay calm since this wasn't reality and Mei had her own life. Suddenly, the fat man handed him a skewer of cooked fish and told him to eat, which Rong Yu accepted. He stared at the fish skewer for a long time before eating slowly, constantly reminding himself that it was nothing more than a dream. After finishing the fish, Rong Yu leaned back comfortably on the floor, telling himself not to get lost in this atmosphere and these emotions. This isn't reality, and this isn't me. I must not get lost in it, he thought as the large man's hand shielded the firelight. The cozy atmosphere lulled Rong Yu into a deep sleep, but the next morning, an old white-haired man sat despondently by the stream as birds chirped. He wondered in confusion what was happening as Rong Yu stared blankly at the face of the old man, whose body he now inhabited. Utterly shocked and unable to believe his eyes, he fearfully rubbed his face and lamented, wondering if he had suddenly turned into an old man. As evening approached, Rong Yu sat on the ground just as before, knitting his brows in confusion and wondering what was going on. Suddenly, he jolted awake from the dream, and as Rong Yu looked around at his surroundings, he panted with relief, glad it was only a dream. He slowly crawled out of the straw hut and saw the large man and the thin man busy breaking stones and cutting wood, making him sigh and wonder what was so lucky about this. Wake up, Rong Yu. Do you really consider this lucky? A few hours later, Rong Yu approached a nearby tree and called out to the large man. Hey, look at this. The large man understood and cut down trees for a raft. Rong Yu and the thin man boarded first while the large man cut more before joining. Seeing him approach, Rong Yu reached out to help him onto the raft, and the large man used his momentum to step aboard, sending river water splashing everywhere. The three of them quickly departed, drifting down the river to another location, as the large man silently observed the surroundings before finally speaking. I saw two people crossing the river back then. They likely headed upstream, he said as the raft swayed in the strong current and howling wind while they stared ahead in silence. With only the steady rhythm of the oars and the sound of crashing waves, Rong Yu stared into the distance, lost in thought that this wasn't just for a few days or months. Would it take decades of living here to achieve that? He shook his head and bit his lip, thinking that it couldn't be possible, yet wondering if it might be. Rong Yu stared down at the river, imagining himself being submerged in the water, and sighed as he wondered if jumping in was the way back to reality. Amidst the peaceful scenery, he suddenly stood up and gazed silently at the calm surface of the river before stepping to the edge of the raft and diving straight in. The other two had no time to react and could only cry out in alarm as the blue river swallowed him whole, sending up a white spray in the freezing water. As all sound faded away, Rong Yu opened his eyes and looked around at the dreamlike blur, thinking it felt just like when he had previously sunk to the bottom and drowned. He felt the current sweep him away, the rushing water making it impossible to breathe as he gritted his teeth and wondered if this wasn't the way. He then released his grip and let the current carry him, but suddenly a powerful hand seized his arm. The fat man dove in and pulled him from the swirling vortex, after which they both surfaced together, gasping for air incessantly. The fat man and the thin man looked at him with concern while gently patting his back, and a long while later, Jiang Yu sat dazed upon the raft. He looked up at the sky and sighed, thinking that he had failed, and this method wasn't right either. before the three of them resumed their journey after the boy was rescued. The small raft drifted through the deep blue water as sunlight filtered through the canopy to create shimmering paths until they finally reached a new shore. The three quickly began setting up camp by chopping wood and clearing trees before hunting for food together as Jiangyu sighed while following the wind and water to find their way. He looked up at the sky and thought with frustration that this would never work while watching the two men walking ahead of him. He let out a frustrated cry to get their attention, causing the fat man and the thin man to turn back in confusion, wondering what he intended to do. Jiangyu spoke seriously about the search area being too vast to find anything, but the fat man simply pointed ahead and laughed as he told him to keep moving. Jiangyu was infuriated, but could do nothing except follow behind them, bitterly thinking about how frustrating it was that they couldn't understand him. As evening fell, the three of them found a place to stop by a stream where Jiangyu tried every possible way to convey his intentions to them. He thought about how he had already told them this wouldn't work, but then he suddenly remembered with a weary sigh that he couldn't actually speak yet. Unable to communicate anything, Jiangyu lay back on the ground and sighed in deep thought, wondering why he was so concerned about finding their families. The other two quickly lay down on either side of his outstretched arms, and the three of them watched the night sky in happy, silent contemplation. Late at night, Jiangyu sat in the middle quietly eating grilled fish with a pensive look, while the others remained silent amidst the sound of crackling firewood. His eyes flashed with surprise as if he had discovered something, and Jiangyu pointed forward, prompting the other two to quickly look in that direction. They spotted a blazing fire nearby, and the fat man reacted first by shouting joyfully about it as they all stood up to stare at the light in the dark woods. Without hesitation, they grabbed their spears and rushed through the darkness, but the fire vanished just as they arrived, leaving Jiangyu disappointed and the fat man frustrated. Seeing nothing, the three of them ventured deeper into the dark forest, where the moonlight barely lit the path until the person in the lead suddenly froze. A dark figure lurked above with predatory eyes, bow drawn and arrow ready to fly as Rong Yu sensed a presence. The moment he raised his head, he froze as the world went silent, leaving only his thumping heart before he screamed out in denial. He lunged forward in desperation while the trio walked along, startled by a sudden cry of "Brother" from the girl in the tree. "Father, it is me," she called out, leaving the wife stunned before she reacted quickly, her expression tightening with intensity. Biting her lip as the two men rejoiced, the wife leaped down from the branches with the agility of a primate. She dove into her husband's waiting arms and clung to the stout man while weeping, as the family of five shared a tearful embrace. Rong Yu turned to see the braided girl's tear-streaked face as she called to him with a trembling voice, to which he only smiled. The reunited family slept by the campfire, the girl resting her hand on him while Rong Yu watched over her with a tearful gaze. He wondered why he had risked his life for them, realizing that he now truly viewed these people as his own family. The next morning, someone questioned their destination, and the answer home was met with utter confusion. As the two men tried to climb down to the river, Rong Yu stopped them with gritted teeth, making the stout man fear he might jump. He pushed them away, signaling that he would not jump into the water again. Before the family finally reached their village, they found only bloody ruins, yet the braided girl excitedly pulled his hand to run, leading Rong Yu to follow her lead. He smiled, remembering how Suya used to challenge him to a game of tag before sprinting away into the distance. In his past life, Rong Su would laugh and chase after his daughter with the speed and determination of a marathon runner. He would eventually catch Suya and lift her up, ignoring her playful complaints about the game ending too quickly before the vision faded. Back in the primitive era, Rong Yu caught up to the girl, who then beckoned him to follow her as he looked around inquisitively. He stood frozen in shock at the sight of 3 budding flower beds, his expression shifting to one of slight disappointment as they basked in the sun. As the sun dipped below the trees, the energetic girl asked where they were headed, only to be puzzled when the stout man replied, "Home." When she questioned which home he meant, Rong Yu reached out to comfort her, guiding her along a path lined with radiant, glowing flowers. In the center, all three were filled with admiration as the old man and the youth pointed into the cave to proudly show off their work, leaving the skinny man so stunned his mouth hung wide open. Stepping inside, the braided girl could only let out a long gasp of wonder at the special gift, a colored painting on the rock wall revealed by the woman's torch. The little girl was delighted, pointing at the wall and asking if it was her. The drawing was adorable if a bit crude, and as night fell, they gathered together around the campfire. Rong Yu held a grilled fish and was about to take a bite, but he reconsidered and handed the skewer to the braided girl, and they all ate happily by the warm fire. The sight brought tears to the father's eyes as the fire faded and the cave grew dark, while elsewhere, amidst a cluster of small tents, a man was presenting a headdress and a feathered ring. A hand slowly reached out to lift the items as the butcher watched with wide-eyed astonishment, just as a voice announced that a deer had been caught but appeared to have been mauled by a predator. He uttered only a single command, "Die!" And Mayan Yan immediately approached with a bone flute, blowing a mournful note that shrieked and echoed throughout the entire forest. His eyes bulged in shock as he stood frozen atop a boulder with a fierce expression, overlooking his submissive army. And as the butcher let out a hateful roar, his followers responded with cries of resentment. They all began smearing a red liquid onto their faces, drawing a line down from their foreheads before the red-faced warriors set out with their weapons, prepared for the coming battle. The butcher stood motionless amidst the crowd, while high on a cliff, a sleeping tiger flicked its ear at the commotion and began to stir, stretching its powerful body right on cue. As it moved upward, it came face to face with the group carrying torches through the forest, and the real show began as the beast bared its fangs with fierce eyes while Rong Yu woke and stretched. He yawned so deeply that his eyes watered, and still groggy, Rong Yu wandered around the cave to inspect his surroundings before reaching out to touch a piece of animal hide. A question naturally arose in his mind as to why they needed so many skins, and filled with curiosity, Rong Yu picked up a handful of herbs and wondered what their purpose could be. He couldn't fathom what they were planning, which led him to shrug in frustration, for since he was unable to speak, he had no way of asking for an explanation. It was truly irritating. But sometime later, in a different location, the fat man led a group deep into the woods before turning back to instruct them to wait there. The group quickly took cover behind some nearby bushes, while the fat man gripped his spear tightly and took a large bone from the skinny man. Rong Yu watched the scene with a puzzled frown, shifting his focus to the herd of deer and wondering if the man truly intended to catch them by throwing a spear from such a great distance. To his astonishment, the fat man attached the bone to the spear in the next moment and hurled the weapon toward the deer with a swift, decisive motion. The primitive weapon soared through the air while the golden deer grazed, completely unaware, until a dull thud rang out as the animal was struck down before it could even react. Rong Yu stared in wide-eyed awe at the successful catch, and the fat man immediately signaled for the group to move out, clutching the bone like a precious treasure while Rong Yu gazed at it in wonder. Could that thing really be thrown so far? The fat man quickly pulled the spear from the carcass, just as the silhouettes of animals suddenly appeared in the distance. They turned out to be hyenas, baring their sharp fangs as they charged toward the group, who stood frozen in shock, unable to react in time. Instinctively, the group quickly took up defensive positions against the starving hyenas, who were all drooling heavily, while Rong Yu seemed somewhat overexcited. He brandished his staff in a series of challenging strikes, shouting for them to come closer, confidently smiling as he told himself that this time was different since they had won with only 3 people before. "We have 5 people now," he asserted, but his joy was short-lived as his face suddenly turned pale when he realized with horror that there were only 4 of them left. To his astonishment, the fat man had crouched down to process the deer, and without a word he picked up a leg, further irritating Rong Yu, who wondered why he was skinning it there. Before he could object to the timing of the task, the fat man tossed the deer leg to the hyenas, who immediately fixed their eyes on the meat due to their long-standing hunger. Rong Yu grimaced, screaming internally about why he was giving them all the meat, just as 2 hyenas approached and began competing to sniff the leg. They quickly dragged the 2 legs away, and Rong Yu finally laughed as he realized it was a distraction to lure them away, allowing the group to carefully load the deer onto the fat man's back. As they headed back home through the familiar mountain forest, Rong Yu couldn't help but feel a sense of regret, wondering if they had given away far too much. A plume of black smoke rose from among the green bushes as the group greedily devoured the delicious meat, everyone focusing on eating until they were completely full. Nearby, the butcher suddenly signaled, and the native quickly obeyed by blowing a loud horn that echoed through the forest, prompting the group to raise their spears and stomp firmly on the ground. The group departed in a long line as time slipped away like a shuttle, and as the sun began to set, Rong Yu stood frozen for a moment, staring intently at the scene before him. He wondered why this man loved hides so much, questioning if he was a skin fanatic as the fat man boastfully showed off dozens of neatly dried skins inside the cave. The group used branches to measure Rong Yu's body, leaving him confused about their actions until the fat man produced a small piece of bone. He skillfully carved a long groove into the bone, while his wife's hands quickly twisted 3 strands of grass, the group working together in a series of rhythmic movements. Rong Yu stared at the pile of materials, hides, bones, and grass, feeling a bit bewildered until the fat man suddenly waved him away and told him to go to sleep, causing him to frown in annoyance. He let out a weary sigh, thinking they could do whatever they wanted as it was none of his business. Yet he wondered why he was so curious before eventually drifting into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, the group continued their diligent work, neatly carving each piece of bone until, in the final step, a skillful hand lifted a small bone fragment. The fat man stared at it intensely while his wife and the thin man carefully cut along the hide. Once a needle was quickly finished, he brought it to his wife, who praised his work as they continued to toil away. Her nimble hands rhythmically stitched the two hides together with great skill, and by the next morning, the sun had already reached the mountain's peak. The stout man woke Rong Yu, telling him to get up, as he and the braided girl yawned sleepily. Yet they were instantly wide awake with wonder the moment they opened their eyes. The wife and the thin man suddenly produced 2 sets of leather clothing and excitedly dressed Rong Yu and the braided girl, who shouted with joy at how wonderful the garments were as he looked at his new clothes with deep satisfaction. A radiant smile unconsciously spread across his face as he muttered his approval, while the tribespeople formed a long line along the mountainside, led by the butcher. He stared intently ahead, and that evening, the butcher stood upon a high platform before the entire tribe to grandly announce that their hunt would begin the following day. Believing that winter was fast approaching, and they required more meat and livestock, the butcher held up a beast's skull to emphasize his point. He declared with grim emphasis that they would hunt down the mother of that creature, contemptuously cursing her entire lineage of mates and offspring. The butcher screamed with bitter resentment that the beast had slaughtered many of their kin and must be killed, prompting the tribespeople to erupt in excited cheers. The following morning in that same familiar forest, the tribespeople worked in perfect harmony to construct shelters out of timber, while the butcher conversed with an elderly man nearby. Rong Yu and the braided girl practiced their archery until 2 arrows soon went whistling through the air. The braided girl's arrow struck the bullseye while Rong Yu's missed, causing her to leap for joy as he silently acknowledged her impressive skill. Feeling disappointed and wondering why he had failed, Rong Yu watched as the wife approached to correct his posture and offer him words of encouragement. The thin man suddenly appeared to tell him he was doing it wrong, waving his hands to demonstrate the proper technique and mimicking the flight of an arrow. After being shown how the arrow should fly, Rong Yu immediately took his position and decisively loosed an arrow using his newly learned form. The arrow soared through the air with unstoppable force before thudding directly into the bullseye, much to the delight of the entire family. Rong Yu bashfully scratched his head as the stout man and the braided girl both excitedly gestured for him to do it once more. In the distance, a bow was drawn as 3 tribesmen lay in ambush behind the trees, while others armed with spears hid among the bushes and rocks. The butcher suddenly raised his hand and then snapped it down, signaling the tribespeople to unleash a volley of arrows that struck the herd of wild boars. The terrified boars attempted to flee, but the tribespeople gave them no quarter, hurling spears that brought down many of the beasts while others were left wounded. Though the wounded animals instinctively tried to escape, the tribespeople pursued them relentlessly until the entire herd was finally subdued. The triumphant natives carried the carcasses on their backs, and soon the pigs were hung neatly from the branches as their pale thighs were laid upon the chopping blocks. With a single axe stroke, the meat was split in 2 as the natives worked in perfect harmony, finishing the processing in an instant before resuming their hunt. One man suddenly raised his hand to signal the group, revealing a massive footprint that he carefully measured with his palm. His companion made a hideous face before they quickly dispersed, though one stopped and looked warily into the sky, only to find nothing in the trees. As the natives ventured deeper into the woods, the wife, Rong Yu, and Braids entered the familiar forest carrying their bows. Suddenly, she signaled for them to halt and pointed tensely toward a rabbit that was quietly nibbling on tender blades of grass. Rong Yu looked on with hunger and cautiously crept forward, raising his bow just as he had been taught, while elsewhere, the butcher's group made a discovery. A native presented a mysterious object consisting of strange fragments held in his palm, causing the butcher to shout out in excitement. Declaring he had found it, he mobilized his men, but the butcher soon froze as his attention was drawn to a colossal footprint on the ground, leaving him paralyzed with shock. While Rong Yu remained focused on aiming his bow at the rabbit, massive footprints had silently appeared on the ground behind him. These were clearly the tracks of a gargantuan beast, and as the innocent white rabbit looked into the distance, an arrow suddenly whistled through the air. Unfortunately, the shot missed and the rabbit fled, leaving a frustrated Rong Yu to curse under his breath as he sprinted through the trees in pursuit. The creature was incredibly swift and difficult to catch, but Rong Yu smiled with determination vowing to himself that he would capture it no matter what. Meanwhile, the butcher and his subordinates were scouring the forest when a falling acorn caught the attention of one of the natives. He watched a squirrel scurrying along a branch, while the others pressed on until a report came in that the trail was lost, prompting the butcher to order a thorough search. They soon discovered a fresh skeleton, and as one native reached out to inspect it, another let out a terrified scream. A fierce tiger suddenly lunged from the distance, and though a native managed to block its bite, his spear quickly snapped in half. Someone screamed for them to run as the tiger relentlessly pursued them, leaving the butcher to flee in a fit of silent, teeth-grinding rage. Suddenly, a native blew a horn that echoed throughout the vast forest, and the rabbit was unable to avoid being startled. An arrow immediately struck the creature down onto the grass, allowing a triumphant Rong-Yu to pick it up and celebrate his catch. But then Rong-Yu stopped instinctively, wondering what was happening. Feeling a surge of fear, he glanced around, confused as to where everyone had gone since they were supposed to be following him. Meanwhile, the forest was in a state of constant upheaval. His wife shouted urgently, pointing into the distance. Still unaware of the situation, Rong-Yu continued forward in fear until the stout man spotted him and called out anxiously, "Son." The family was soon reunited, embracing each other tightly as the sound of a horn echoed once more, growing increasingly frantic throughout the vast forest. The horn quickly drew the attention of Rong-Yu's family, while the fierce tiger continued its relentless pursuit, eventually sinking its teeth into an unfortunate tribesman. Horrified by the sight, the butcher raised his hand and roared an order to fire, prompting the tribesmen hidden in the trees to release a volley of arrows that struck the tiger instantly. Unfortunately, its thick hide deflected most of the projectiles, yet the tribesmen charged forward recklessly with their spears, shouting with fierce determination. The tiger was soon surrounded with no way out, staring at the crowd in terror as a tribesman suddenly blew his horn. Understanding the signal, his companions lunged forward with their spears, but the agile tiger easily evaded them, prompting the tribesmen to launch a coordinated assault. Despite the flurry of spears, the tiger managed to escape until the butcher let out a thunderous roar and delivered a blow that severely wounded the beast, causing it to howl in agony. The tribesmen took the opportunity to close in as Rong-Yu's family rushed over from a distance, while the tiger ground its teeth in pure resentment. It faltered under the fierce onslaught of the crowd, finally showing signs of fear as sweat began to pour down its brow. As the tiger trembled, the butcher shouted that it was trying to flee, just as the beast lunged at a tribesman, prompting the butcher to command everyone to duck before a barrage of sharp arrows was unleashed. The tiger suddenly spun around and narrowly avoided every arrow, escaping death by a hair's breadth before bolting forward at full speed. The butcher stubbornly roared for them to give chase, and a tribesman immediately blew his horn, signaling the rest of the group to surge forward. Each of them gripped their sharp spears tightly, but the tiger managed to slip away again, leaving Rong-Yu's family wide-eyed when they suddenly came face to face with it. The tiger instinctively backed away, staring at the people before it in terror, while Rong-Yu's family stood there panting and watching the beast with bated breath. A sudden downpour drenched the forest as Rong-Yu's family continued their pursuit, with his wife and Rong-Yu both taking their positions to fire their bows. The clever tiger easily evaded the shots and kept running, while the thin man handed a familiar bone to the stout man, who quickly prepared his spear to hurl at the beast. He threw the spear with all his might, causing the entire family to stop in shock as the tiger was finally brought down, lying motionless upon the grass. They anxiously rushed over to inspect the scene and cheered in triumph at having defeated the tiger. Though Rong-Yu couldn't help but wonder how they had caught it and where its wounds had come from. Over here, a native had caught up and called the others over as Rong-Yu's family stood frozen in shock, while the butcher immediately charged forward, swinging his axe. He clashed directly with the stout man, who managed to parry a series of his lethal strikes as the two sides traded blows amidst a torrential downpour until the other natives arrived and quickly surrounded the family. Rong-Yu watched the scene in terror, fearfully wondering who these people were as the stout man refused to back down and continued to charge forward with his spear. Unfortunately, the butcher evaded the attack and delivered a crushing blow to the man's neck, sending the stout man crashing face first into the ground. Seizing the opportunity, a native blew a horn, and the rest of the tribe swarmed out like a disturbed nest of ants at their leader's call as Rong-Yu stared in horror at the sight, while the rain finally ceased. With only a few droplets remaining on the leaves, Rong-Yu's family was forced to their knees on the ground as the butcher glared down at them. Captivated by the wife's figure, the butcher smirked and ordered his men to take the women and slaughter all the men, causing Rong-Yu to freeze in shock. He let out a gasp as the stout man was executed by a native in an instant, prompting the wife to scream out in agony for them to stop. The thin man could not escape his grim fate and was killed shortly after, and as it became Rong-Yu's turn, Tears began to well up in his eyes. Rong-yu squeezed his eyes shut and ground his teeth in bitterness before suddenly bolting upright in his familiar bed, rubbing his neck in a daze as he recalled the entire ordeal. A primitive language that had long been forgotten suddenly surged within him, and Rong-yu instinctively called out for his father before bursting into inexplicable sobs. Rong-yu quickly put on his glasses and stared blankly into the void, haunted by the horrific massacre he had just witnessed as he questioned the reality of it all. He wondered if he had died and returned to reality before checking his phone, his brow furrowing as he realized that hardly any time had passed at all. It felt like a long, vivid dream that was indistinguishable from reality. But later at the office, the familiar figures of the stout and thin men suddenly appeared while Rong-yu was focused on his work. He instinctively turned his head, but only an empty void met his gaze as night fell and the lights of the apartment complex began to flicker on. Rong-yu confidently presented his report, stating that all evidence and witness testimony proved the plaintiff, Park Jun, had prior knowledge of the contract. He grimaced in discomfort for a moment, and soon it was Saturday. As Rong-yu was driving, the silhouettes of that native family appeared in the seats beside him. At a red light, he glanced sideways again for no apparent reason, and pursed his lips in frustration before eventually pulling over at a certain park. Sue ran toward him with a radiant smile, crying out for her father, and Rong-yu joyfully embraced her while his wife stood by with her arms crossed in annoyance. The little girl had been waiting for a long time, and the woman gently reminded him to spend more time with her since Sue was still so young. His wife emphasized with a heavy heart that the little girl truly needed her father. Rong-yu forced a bright smile, patted the girl's head, and replied that he would do his best. Shortly after, the two of them arrived at the campsite. Once there, the little girl cried out in delight, asking if this was all just a dream. She was overjoyed to go camping with her father. Hearing this, Rong-yu smiled and quickly began preparing the food. Unable to contain her hunger, the girl exclaimed that everything looked delicious. Rong-yu helplessly warned her that standing too close would cause a burn. The clever Soo-hee asked if she could try grilling once. He enthusiastically agreed, telling her to hold his hand as the food sizzled. As dusk fell, the father and daughter gathered around the fire. Rong-yu carefully blew on a sausage to cool it down before affectionately handing it to Soo-hee, who ate it eagerly with a look of pure bliss. A familiar figure suddenly appeared before Rong-yu's eyes, causing him to freeze in silence. A hand was abruptly placed on his head, and it turned out to be the fat man. He was soothingly patting his head as the fat man gave a satisfied smile and praised him. Rong-yu looked up, his eyes filled with utter astonishment. Seeing this, Soo-hee turned to look at him with curiosity and softly called out to him. She then pointed upward, her eyes filled with doubt as she asked why he was staring at the sky. Upon hearing her, Rong-yu gave a forced laugh and leaned down to grab a meat skewer, telling her it was nothing and urging her to eat more after she finished. Pigtails reached her hand toward Rong-yu, her eyes wide as she asked for more. Rong-yu immediately reacted by glaring at her, only to end up lowering his head. His hand kept ruffling his hair as he questioned himself, wondering what was wrong with him. The scene shifted to the night, where Soo-hee excitedly moved her hands closer to the fire. The little girl smiled radiantly and cheered with joy about how warm it was. At the same time, the group of people also warmed their hands by the roaring flames. Witnessing that scene, Rong-yu furrowed his brows. After a long while, the surroundings fell into a state of silence near a small tent. Light flickered inside the tent as Rong-yu gently stroked Soo-hee's head. He spoke in a low voice, telling her it was time to go to sleep. Hearing this, the little girl looked displeased and said she hated going to sleep, leaving Rong-yu quite surprised by her sudden remark. Soo-hee trembled as she spoke, saying that tomorrow would arrive the moment she woke up, then burst into tears and wailed that she wouldn't be able to see her father anymore. Rong-yu quickly leaned in and tried to reassure her, saying that wasn't true and he could see her whenever she wanted. Soo-hee continued to wail that her father was always busy, so Rong-yu gently soothed her, promising he would never be too busy when she needed him until the clever girl asked for his word. Later, the camp fell completely silent as Soo-hee drifted off to sleep, while Rong-yu continued to comfort her, smiling to himself when he saw her drooling in her sleep. A while later, Rong-yu sat alone in the darkness, scrolling through his touchscreen until his finger stopped on a specific article. After studying it closely, Rong-yu furrowed his brows and wondered if the creature he had encountered was actually a smilodon. He gazed into the distance, lost in thought about the Pleistocene and Holocene epochs, wondering if it had been cold and snowy back then. Or perhaps it was just starting to turn cold. He shook his head, dismissing the thought as just a dream despite how real it felt. Rong-yu looked up at the starry sky and told himself it was only a dream before the scene shifted to a highly modern city. Suddenly, Soo-hee cried out for her father, and Rong-yu rushed to embrace her, whispering in her ear for her to stop crying as he had promised the day before. Rong Yu solemnly repeated that he would come to see her whenever she wanted, and the little girl nodded, remembering his promise. After speaking, he stood up and waved vigorously, and Suya turned around to wave back, bringing a wide smile to Rong Yu's face. His smile quickly faded, replaced by a somber expression, and in the blink of an eye, Rong Yu vanished completely. Inside, he was busy typing with his back straight and eyes fixed on the computer screen until the sky outside turned pitch black. Rong Yu diligently transcribed every line of the testimony from witness Choi Yi-hun when the sudden ringing of his phone startled him. His screen displayed a photo of Yu Rong's family, along with a message saying it was the picture he had intended to show him earlier. Rong Yu immediately picked up the phone and swiped the screen, his expression shifting instantly as his eyes widened in shock at what he saw. In that moment, Rong Yu vaguely recalled his time in the tribe, where he had presented a sharp stone shard to a fat man. Returning to reality, Rong Yu furrowed his brows at the images of various stone tools and rushed back to his desk. Rong Yu quickly scanned several reports regarding the woolly rhinoceros from the late Pliocene to the Pleistocene epoch, noting its maximum body length of 3.6 meters and its height. As the name suggests, the woolly rhinoceros possessed thick fur to endure the northern cold and inhabited Southeast Asian tropical forests, alongside the Pachycrocuta from the late Pliocene. This was the largest hyena species in Earth's history. When standing, its shoulder height alone was immense, and like modern hyenas, they hunted cooperatively, with fossils discovered in China. The mammoth existed from prehistoric times to the dawn of history, belonging to the genus Mammuthus, with the name originating from the Uralic languages. Being part of the elephant family, it is a relative of the modern African elephant. A moment later, Rong Yu closed his laptop with a serious expression, questioning himself in frustration. He wondered what on earth he was doing and what would come next as questions flooded his mind, such as what if those stones were genuine artifacts and whether he should report them for the public good. That thought, Rong Yu gritted his teeth and asked himself what he intended to do. And the next morning, his boss's voice rang out, telling him to take a seat. The boss chuckled teasingly, telling him this wasn't the military and not to be so stiff, before later asking with a serious tone if he was well prepared. Wu Rong leaned forward to speak, but Rong Yu suddenly cut in to answer quickly, stating firmly that they were fully prepared and there would be no issues. The boss appeared satisfied, noting the law firm had high expectations for this case and promising extra compensation for a successful outcome, while Wu Yu and Rong Yu listened with bowed heads. The scene shifted to the local court as the two of them walked out of the office together, when he suddenly turned around to look behind him. Rong Yu felt as though a group of tribespeople was closing in on him, prompting a curious Wu Rong to ask if he had forgotten something, but he remained silent while clutching his head. He gritted his teeth and cursed under his breath, and seeing his distressed expression, Wu Rong asked worriedly if he had forgotten something, but he still did not respond. His lips were pressed thin with gravity, and his brow was deeply furrowed, and only after a long moment did he finally react, saying it was nothing before the next morning arrived. From his sacred seat, the Supreme Court judge solemnly announced the start of the 2024 trial, adding in a low voice that the case involved the plaintiff, Mr. Pu Zhaijin. The defendants were the Gaia Company, Gongshan City, and the Xinjiang Construction Group. As the judge stared intently at the indictment and continued speaking, the case concerned the future data center developer regarding the invalidation of property ownership transfers. Upon hearing this, the 76-year-old Pu Zhaijin shouted in protest, angrily asking if they knew what his home meant to him. He claimed it was his ancestral home, where 5 generations had lived with many memories and traditions, leading the Gaia representative to turn and ask if the house was a national heritage site. The Xinjiang Group representative shook his head, stating it was merely an old house, while he furrowed his brow and asked if the land survey was complete, to which the Gongshan City representative quickly nodded in confirmation. He had promised his wife they would live there in peace until death, and Pu Zhaijin turned his gaze toward the judge, emphasizing every single word with a low, heavy voice. He had no intention of selling the house, while the boss sat calmly below observing the situation until a while later in courtroom number 7. Inside, the lawyer stood up formally and solemnly announced to the court that he wished to summon village chief Kui Zai-zun as a witness. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Rong and Rong Wu were nearly stunned, and he hurriedly leaned in closer in a moment of panic, asking if he had heard anything since that was supposed to be their witness. Rong Wu shook his head in confusion, bit his lip, and quietly turned to look back. Beside him stood a familiar fat man, while Wu Rong tried to reassure himself that since they had also summoned him, everything would likely be fine. Sensing something was wrong, the boss looked puzzled, and shortly after the lawyer stood directly before Zai-zun and called out sternly. The lawyer spoke each word with sharp clarity, asking the witness if he had discussed land registration procedures with the plaintiff Pu Taijian and if he had been authorized. Startled by the question, Zai Zun looked awkward as Wu Rong quickly interjected that he was referring to paperwork like registration authorization, leading Zai Zun to reply that he only assisted with standard procedures due to the complexity. The lawyer immediately cut in, emphasizing that handling standard paperwork did not mean he had been granted full authorization for everything. He then pressed further, asking if the man believed he was authorized and if he possessed a power of attorney, causing Zai Zun to fall silent and press his lips together. At that moment, Rong Wu slammed the table and firmly asserted that they did, before immediately turning to address the judge. When asked if the submitted files contained the power of attorney for this task, the judge slowly flipped through the records and looked doubtfully at Rong Wu, stating it was not there. Hearing this, Rong Wu looked utterly bewildered and hurriedly leaned over to shuffle through the stacks of paper on the table, insisting he had already submitted it. Suddenly, the pile of papers fell to the floor, causing the boss to look annoyed and ask what he was doing, while Rong Wu hesitantly picked them up and stammered an apology to the court. He bit his lip and cursed under his breath, and when the fat man approached from behind to anxiously ask if he was all right, Rong Wu turned and shouted at him to stay out of it. Suddenly, the person before him changed to Wu Rong, and after the trial ended, the boss bowed and hesitantly remarked that the case wasn't over yet and they would prepare better next time. Before leaving, the Gaia representative reminded them to keep trying, while the group continued to discuss the matter, and the representative questioned them in dissatisfaction. He asked if they could actually handle it and suggested changing lawyers, to which the other person hesitantly replied they would consider it as the boss turned around. He coldly asked if they had even prepared properly, adding that he could understand losing if they had worked hard. The boss pointed his finger directly at Rong Wu's face, stating that losing due to poor preparation was unacceptable, and frowned as he reminded him that this was the second incident today. After speaking, the boss turned to leave while the other two bowed, but then he suddenly spun back around and mentioned the rewards for winning the lawsuit. The boss furrowed his brows and spoke sternly, warning that if the case's outcome damaged the company's reputation, there would be a fitting punishment. Hearing this, Rong Yu could only bow his head and agree before the scene shifted to a psychiatric clinic where a dedicated female doctor was conducting an examination. "So you have been seeing deceased individuals?" the doctor asked, and Rong Yu honestly confirmed that he had, though they were a prehistoric family from his dreams. She was momentarily confused and repeated his words about a prehistoric family, prompting him to hurriedly use hand gestures to illustrate until the doctor finally clapped her hands in satisfaction. Noting how specific the details and situations were, she caringly asked if those lifelike dreams might be a reflection of his own emotions. "Emotions?" Rong Yu repeated subconsciously, as the doctor gently suggested it might be a manifestation of guilt for failing to protect his family, leaving the helpless man to look at her and ask what he should do. The doctor gave him serious guidance, suggesting that the next time he had that dream, he should try to think more positively and attempt to find a solution. She sternly reminded him to do this so he would not feel regretful anymore, but Rong Yu remained silent before looking up at her and asking if there would really be a next time. The doctor paused for a moment before replying that it depended on him, and later, as Rong Yu lay on his bed staring fixedly at the ceiling, he found himself lost in thought. He vaguely recalled the doctor's words about how he was essentially the type of person who deeply cherished his family. As she had continued to explain, she noted that he was divorced and burdened by guilt, but then the vision shifted to depict a perfect family where Rong Yu was happily embracing Sua. His wife stood beside him before the vision shifted to the tribal group where everyone was smiling radiantly. But back in reality, Rong Yu was so overwhelmed by helplessness that he burst into tears. He eventually fell into a slumber after his long bout of sobbing, his face appearing peaceful in sleep until his eyes suddenly snapped wide open. Faces both strange and familiar immediately filled his vision as Mophead turned to report that he was awake, while Curie stared at Rong Yu with wide eyes and muttered that he had truly regained consciousness. Unlike the others, he was completely dazed and only managed to regain his senses after a while, sitting up slowly as Mophead fearfully hid behind Curie, while the boy remarked that he had come back to life, prompting Straightbangs to call him an idiot in annoyance. Yasaki corrected him, saying he had simply woken up rather than returned from the dead, while Rong Yu stared at them in shock, wondering who these children were. Rong Yu looked up and questioned his surroundings, wondering where he was as he crawled toward the edge of the shelter and touched the fabric, questioning why the entrance was so low. Seeing this, Curie shouted a loud warning for him not to open it, but before he could react, Rong Yu had already opened the flap, allowing the white snow to come rushing in. The landscape was blanketed in a thin layer of snow, and as Rong Yu crawled outside without hesitation, Curie carefully draped a coat over him and warned him that it was freezing. Nearby, Fringe called out to the children not to wander too far, while Rong Yu stared at his reflection in the lake and felt as though he had been through this before. He recalled a bloody scene where a blade had been pressed against him, and in his terror, he could only close his eyes and wait for death before his mind returned to the present. Filled with questions, Rong Yu wondered how he had survived and looked toward Curie, questioning why he was even in this place. Curie looked up at Rong Yu with a dazed expression, while he grew frustrated and roared inwardly, unable to speak just as it had been back then. After a long moment, Rong Yu solemnly pointed to himself and frantically waved his hands while mouthing, "How?" then pointed to the ground to signal his confusion about his location. His lips moved incessantly as he tried to ask how he had come to be there, and Curie finally reacted by leaning in to ask if he was wondering why he was in this place. Though he did not fully understand, Rong Yu nodded solemnly, causing Curie to fall silent and stare at him for a long time as a memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. She saw a group of people busy with preparations, and as she gripped her weapon tightly, she excitedly shouted that she wanted to go hunting, but they all refused her at once. After being told no, Curie looked away in dissatisfaction until some time later, when the children began running around and calling out for their big sister. Curie sat huddled beneath a tree until Mophead and his friends smiled and invited her to join them and play. She coldly waved them away without hesitation, causing the children to burst into tears and complain about her refusal to play with them. Feeling helpless, Curie stood up to follow the children, though she glanced toward the forest and whispered to herself that she truly wanted to try hunting. Curie turned to see the children laughing happily before they produced 4 different leaves, which she then placed in the water while announcing that the first leaf to float downstream would win. As the leaves drifted along the current, Mophead excitedly chased after them, claiming his was faster, though Fringe quickly disagreed. Curie hurried after them and shouted for them to slow down as she watched the children running in a single file line from the opposite side. Suddenly, they all stopped and stared at a single spot, prompting Curie to peer over and wonder what was there beneath the surface of the water. Rong Yu was seen floating aimlessly in the water, causing the terrified children to run away screaming for their mother, while Mophead shouted that there was a person. The adults looked on in utter confusion as Rong Yu lay unconscious on the ground, surrounded by the group as if he were a strange creature while snow began to blanket the landscape. The children peered in to stare at Rong Yu, who remained motionless with a pale face as another night passed by. The snow continued to fall while the adults kept a close watch on Rong Yu until the following morning arrived and the storm finally began to subside. The children and Gyuli huddled closer to him. One asked if he was dead while another whispered that he was still alive. After a long while, Mophead and the chubby kid watched Rong Yu intently. Suddenly, he snapped his eyes open. Seeing him wake, the children were paralyzed with fear. Returning to reality, Rong Yu and Gyuli sat by a lake. He felt a sense of confusion, wondering if he had simply drifted down the river. Had he been in a coma all this time before waking up? Rong Yu instinctively recalled his happy life with the chubby boy's family. He frowned as a suspicion arose. So it continues from that moment? Suddenly, a man appeared and shouted that he was home. Rong Yu remained silent by the campfire. A strange silence filled the air. No one said a word. Rong Yu turned to the child beside him. Steamed Bun placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke. "Hey, what's your name?" Rong Yu fell silent at the greeting. He suddenly remembered his past self shouting that his name was Jin Zhangyu. A classmate approached him with a notebook. "Zhangyu, help me with this." Everyone used to call his name constantly. "Zhangyu, Jin Zhangyu, Zhangyu, Mr. Jin Zhangyu." As an adult, Zhangyu formally presented his business card as lawyer Jin Zhangyu. At the same time, he shook his head frantically. No, that wasn't it. They weren't asking for his real name. Rong Yu felt flustered. They were asking for his name in this world. What was his name here? Rong Yu's expression became pensive as he pondered. What was his name? Back then, the chubby kid had shouted for him to come along, and another person spoke up. "Look!" Pigtails ran over happily and grabbed Rong Yu's hand. "Big brother!" Recalling everything, he scratched his head. Come to think of it, he had never been called by a name before. His face soured. Perhaps names weren't necessary here? Nearby, the others gossiped about someone not having a name. Yuli suddenly placed her hand on his head and told everyone that the boy couldn't speak. Hearing this, he looked up at her and let out a strange sound. This piqued her curiosity, and she asked if they even had names. While she was still confused, Rong Yu suddenly stood up. Yuli calmly placed her hand on her chest and introduced herself as Winter. She then introduced the others, Sun, Moon, and Star. She continued naming the others, father, uncle, younger uncle, aunt, and sister. Rong Yu listened closely. Morning, Autumn, Big Eyes, and Roundy. After the introductions, Gyuli turned back to him. "You were found in the river." Her face lit up with excitement as she made a suggestion. "How about the name River?" Hearing this, Rong Yu silently pondered the name. The others behind him also began muttering it. Yuli immediately looked at Rong Yu with expectant eyes, asking if it was okay. He remained lost in thought. So my name is River. A smile slowly spread across his face as he thought, not bad, and afterward, everyone enjoyed the grilled meat together. Everyone laughed and joked together joyfully. A heartwarming scene that touched Rong Yu deeply until a loud call rang out the next morning. Everyone excitedly headed to the river to wash up, and a young boy turned to his friend to remark on how cold the water was as Rong Yu also leaned down to splash his face. It was indeed freezing, but as the sun rose higher, the tribal children began playing hide-and-seek, scattering in all directions after being warned not to wander too far. The children tried to avoid being caught by the seeker with joyful anticipation, and once she finished counting, Curie turned around and asked who she should look for first. She quickly spotted their hiding places one by one, and one boy gave a silly grin as if he hadn't expected to be found so soon. A while later, 2 other boys were still on the run, but Curie's sharp eyes quickly located them, and she excitedly pointed them out as the number of captured players grew. She called out as she found each person while Rong Yu assisted her from the side, and several hours passed until only a few children remained hidden. Curie searched the area thoroughly, even checking inside various tents, and when she couldn't find him, they began calling out for Big Eyes as they walked. Big Eyes! The bright sunlight brought warmth to the village, but the boy nicknamed Mophead looked on in terror at the sight before him. A wild wolf was silently prowling toward him, and its menacing appearance brought the boy to the verge of tears as the words of a village elder flashed through his mind. The elder had warned them with a grave expression that they must never run from a wolf, for it would only chase them down and bite them. Back then, all the children had listened with wide, fearful eyes, and now Mophead's eyes glistened with an unbelievable amount of fear. Returning to the present, the wolf continued to stare forward until a voice suddenly called out from behind. As they called for Big Eyes, the wolf shifted its focus toward the new sound, and sensing the danger, the boy scrambled to his feet. Though tears and snot were streaming down his face, the boy tried his best to remain calm, while Rong Yu pointed ahead and shouted. He seemed to have spotted Mophead nearby, but just as Curie was about to approach, Mimo suddenly reached out to stop her. Sister, look, they've noticed the fierce wolf over there, she exclaimed, and as Rong Yu began to step forward, she asked in confusion if he was really going toward it. Curie was baffled by his actions, but he gave a firm nod with eyes full of resolve before charging toward the wolf to save the child. He even made a terrifying face to intimidate the beast, a sight that caused the wolf to freeze in its tracks for a moment. He still didn't realize the danger and kept frowning, even approaching Mop to try and save the boy. Enraged, the wolf lunged directly at them, freezing him in his tracks until a sudden shout distracted the beast, making it retreat as the village elder arrived to save them. Mop ran crying toward the elder, calling for his grandfather, while the old man gently stroked the boy's head to comfort him. With an affectionate gaze, the elder praised him for doing well, his warm voice echoing through the snowy landscape as he explained that wolves rarely attack humans. He continued to share his knowledge with the children, noting that they might still be attacked if they intruded upon the wolves' territory. He grew increasingly puzzled, wondering why the wolf was there if it wasn't its territory, while the village elder quickly glanced in another direction. The elder sighed thoughtfully and wondered aloud how strange it was, and the children nearby immediately followed suit, repeating his words. Fatty remained confused about what was so strange, as the scene shifted to a snowy forest where a pack of wolves was playing together. These wolves seemed to have grown very close, and one of them was even heavily pregnant. She was in poor health and appeared exhausted, her large belly indicating that her pups were nearly ready to be born. The other wolves stood up to sniff the air, and suddenly ran toward a high cliff to investigate a pack of hyenas, just as a small stone fell from above. This alerted the hyenas, but the wolves had already vanished, sprinting ahead as if they were heading toward a specific destination. The scene shifted back to the village, now completely blanketed in white snow, where Curie stubbornly announced she was coming along, surprising the villagers. The woman smiled and agreed they should all go, but she warned them with a worried expression not to wander too far, especially her. This startled Mop, and soon the children followed the adults to the mountain where cabbages had grown, and the women were busy harvesting them. Even the children worked hard, and Curie held out a withered leaf to her mother, calling out to her. The woman shook her head and said it wasn't edible, while Yun Shen silently stared at the vegetable in his hand, lost in thought. He found it increasingly confusing, wondering if it was watercress or not, before a strange smile suddenly crossed his face. Despite the winter season, some greenery remained, and noticing something unusual, he turned his head to see what it was. Giant rhinoceroses were still grazing there, reminding Yun Shen of the time he spent constantly staring at his computer screen. Information regarding various rhinoceros species appeared on the display, and returning to reality, Jiang Yu immediately identified the massive creature as a woolly rhino. A joyful smile spread across his face as he marveled at its existence before quickly standing up to signal the woman nearby. Noticing his curiosity, the young woman chuckled and identified the rhinoceros, cautioning him to simply keep his distance from them. After some time, the children kept bringing items forward, and their parents smiled while patting their sons' heads, confirming that the items were indeed edible. As time slipped by and the sunlight grew more intense, the village elder stood outside lost in thought while his hands inspected the dry branches. The elder could not hide his astonishment at the strange sight, while the cracks forming in the ice also quickly drew his attention. It seemed the village elder had sensed something amiss. While elsewhere, the villagers gathered to examine footprints left on the ground. They sprinkled a type of medicinal powder over the tracks before engaging in a spirited discussion about staying downwind to avoid detection by the beasts. The group began their ascent up the mountain with steady steps until the leader, sensing something unusual, raised a hand to signal them to slow down. Everyone hastily lowered their heads and moved into position, their faces alight with the excitement of the hunt as the leader signaled once more. The rest of the group quickly lay low to maintain their distance as they spotted several deer grazing nearby. One man chuckled as he drew closer, and the leader promptly signaled for everyone to advance and begin the assault. Without hesitation, they crawled forward to close the gap with joyful expressions. But suddenly, the man beside them waved his hand to signal a halt. The deer continued to graze peacefully, unaware of the approaching danger, as the men readied their hunting gear and prepared for the strike. Sensing a change in the situation, the leader ordered his companions to move even closer, and the three of them crept forward step by step. Just as everything was proceeding according to plan, Huan Fa suddenly charged forward without hesitation and pivoted to take action. He hurled his wooden staff straight ahead, but the sudden commotion immediately alerted the two deer nearby. The animals bolted and vanished into the distance, leaving Huan Fa standing frozen in shock as he watched his prey escape. His companions were infuriated and shouted at him, their anger boiling over at the realization that the hunt had been ruined. They berated Huan Fa for his impatience, but he merely sighed and explained that he feared they would lose the opportunity if he didn't strike. Unable to tolerate this any longer, Yan began to criticize him, speaking in a frustrated tone about how such things always seemed to happen. He didn't forget to announce that they would have to wait for results, and so the group set out once again to continue their hunt, though the lack of any signs of life nearby left them feeling quite helpless. They signaled to one another repeatedly, but found nothing, causing the flat-topped man to sigh in frustration, as he complained that the animals must have sensed them and fled. Hearing this, the frizzy-haired man couldn't hide his disappointment, wondering aloud if they were really going to return empty-handed without catching a single thing. After a brief moment of reflection, the flat-topped man quickly decided that if there were no deer, they would simply have to catch something else, as the group was not ready to give up. Insisting there was still food to be found, they worked together to push a massive fallen tree until it finally flipped over, only to be met with the sight of empty ground that left them all bewildered. The flat-topped man stepped forward and suggested they dig into the earth, and as they followed his lead, their faces soon lit up when they discovered earthworms wriggling in their hands. Sometime later, the hunters finally returned to their families, where the flat-topped man affectionately patted his sons' heads as they greeted him. He nodded in greeting, but Curie looked disappointed and asked where the deer was, a question echoed by the woman nearby, prompting the frizzy-haired man to pull something from his bag as a substitute. He excitedly showed the worm to everyone as they began preparing for their meal, placing stones near the fire while the hardworking women processed the vegetables. The stout woman made sure to secure the bag tightly, while Yang Wu carefully brought the heated pebbles over to it. Standing right beside him, Curie warned him to be careful of the heat as the hot stones were finally placed all around the bag. Seeing this, the silly girl gestured for more, and the group continued to push the heated stones toward the bag of vegetables. Thick steam rose into the air as the cabbage was eventually cooked through this unusual method, and they finally sat down to eat. The silly girl picked up a piece of cabbage and handed it to the stout woman while warning her to be careful of the heat, as everyone else began eating with great enthusiasm. Nearby, Jia Min kept muttering about how strange things were, causing the others to look back in surprise as he suspiciously noted that the winter was lasting far too long, which made the flat-topped man sigh. He argued that it was the same every year and spring was likely coming soon, but the elder disagreed, insisting that the time for spring had long since passed as his suspicions grew. As the elder repeated his concerns, the shaggy-haired man nearby laughed and joked with his friend that the only thing strange was the old man himself. Yang Wu pondered the idea of a winter that never ended, recalling a time from his past when he had spent hours researching on his computer. The screen had displayed various facts about prehistoric times, and one particular phrase had suddenly caught his attention: the Ice Age. He suddenly let out a bizarre shout, and fearing the others wouldn't understand, began trying to explain the concept, sparking a skeptical discussion among the group. What is happening? Why is this? Only Rong Yu remains helpless as this winter seems destined to last forever, causing his expression to gradually sour. Damn it, no matter how much he explains, they do not understand. Yuli, standing nearby, asks in surprise what is wrong as he quickly turns his head. He looks toward her as if seeing a ray of hope, then hurries over to place his hand on her while she seems to realize something, asking repeatedly to be certain if she arrived in winter. He stays there explaining what he has learned, and she finally understands his words about the winter continuing indefinitely. However, the people here do not seem to believe him, instead chatting excitedly about how spring will surely arrive once winter passes. They call it absurd and strange, but the village elder suddenly becomes enraged and shouts that the boy's words actually make sense. The village elder continues to share his observations, telling them to look outside at how long the winter has already lasted, leaving the villagers in silent contemplation. They likely do not know whether to believe him or not, as the snow begins to fall much harder, threatening to freeze everything in this bitter cold. While everyone is still asleep, a sudden cold wind blows in, causing Mop to cling tightly to Rongyu while complaining about the freezing temperature. Rongyu is still unable to sleep, lying there in weary dejection as he suddenly recalls past events, whether they were reality or dreams that felt just as real. Back then, ferocious tigers had relentlessly attacked those around him because he failed to take the initiative, leading to the worst possible outcome as Rongyu walked on. He remains trapped in self-reproach, sighing wearily with tears he cannot hide, feeling powerless as he remembers when everyone was kidnapped by the blue-faced man. Someone had met a tragic end, leading to the death of everyone else, a memory that forces Rongyu to recall the events of his previous life. As the wind blew, his wife and child had completely vanished. Returning to the present, tears stream uncontrollably down his face. Yuli suddenly sat up and stared at him with a bewildered expression, wondering why he was crying. Rongyu hurriedly wiped the tears from his face. He didn't know how to explain it to her, for how could a child understand the unspoken feelings in his heart? Yet she seemed to have guessed something, asking if he was crying because he missed his family. At that moment, Rongyu slowly turned to look at her with a stunned expression. Rongyu continued to gaze intently at the woman before him as thoughts raced through his mind. How could this girl understand his heart so deeply? He even began to wonder if it was because this was all a dream. Sitting there, he took Yuli's hand in his. Or perhaps she truly understood him on a profound level. Memories of his past life resurfaced, and Rongyu thought of his wife and child, longing for his family in the real world. Yet he also recalled the happy moments spent with everyone here, including his family within this dream. However, the truth remained harsh and unforgiving. He could not see them. Sensing Rongyu's inner turmoil, Yuli asked in surprise if his entire family had passed away. He suddenly fell silent, unsure of how to explain. He recalled a scene that should have remained forgotten, and Rongyu's eyes grew heavy with sorrow. He hurriedly shook his head. Thinking of something, Yuli smiled and approached him with a suggestion. If they weren't gone, he should go find them. This suggestion left him stunned for a moment, as he instinctively imagined a terrible outcome. Many innocent people would perish because of such an action, and the unfortunate woman who would be lost was Gyuli herself. With a grave expression, Rongyu quickly signaled that it was forbidden, leaving her completely baffled by his reaction. He even tried to comfort himself with the thought that they might still be alive somewhere nearby. While outside, the freezing blizzard continued to rage. But now was not the time. A gentle, comforting smile appeared on Gyuli's lips as she told him not to be sad, promising that they would be his family. She lay down softly beside Rongyu, giving him a sense of peace as he slowly closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. By the next morning, everyone had gathered together at the site. The village elder quickly shared his thoughts on needing more preparations for winter, but Du Ding didn't hesitate to point out that spring would arrive soon. This made the elder furious, and he began to scold him, arguing that while spring might come one day, there was also the possibility it might never arrive at all. That was exactly his point. Everyone present listened in silence until the handsome man, feeling confused, spoke up to ask a question. So what should we prepare now? The village elder gestured toward Rongyu, and Gyuli prompted him to speak. which gave him a slight start as he wondered if she meant him. Recalling something important, he quickly conveyed his thoughts to the group. Yuli watched him with a dazed look, wondering if he meant food, while the others looked at each other in surprise since that seemed obvious. Rong-yu stood up again to gesture, which Gyuli found somewhat amusing. He was referring to trees, and his actions began to stir the atmosphere among those gathered. Gyuli and the children quickly stood up to mimic his movements, emphasizing the need for very many. And as time passed, the scene shifted to the outdoors. The handsome man swung his axe repeatedly to fell trees, while Du Ding stood by, continuously giving directions for them to drop. And after a period of hard work, at last the massive tree toppled forward, prompting the village's strongest men to quickly haul the timber back, while the smaller ones followed behind. They carried only small twigs, yet everyone worked with great fervor, including Rong-yu and Jiu Li, who joined in the labor without hesitation. Gazing at the leaves before her, she joyfully picked them up and announced that they seemed edible, earning a proud pat on the head for both children from their mother. In this manner, everyone continued to joyfully harvest wood together in preparation for winter, while the hunters simultaneously moved into their designated positions. Mo Yan quickly signaled to everyone with his hand to take it slow, which left Du Fa standing nearby feeling incredibly anxious as they waited for the right moment. Mo Yan shouted the command to strike now, and spears were hurled directly forward, fortunately striking the poor deer they had been targeting. Everyone was overjoyed as they brought their spoils back home, and as their food stores grew, their daily meals gradually became more bountiful while the men continued their regular hunting trips. The wood collected to withstand the winter grew into an increasingly large pile, and it appeared that Du Fa and Ding Tu were gradually becoming more accustomed to hunting. The food they gathered continued to pile up higher and higher as time slowly drifted toward the late evening, until another day passed and a new one began. Kai Lao Shan and the other mischievous children curiously stepped inside to find a culinary paradise, laughing with delight at the abundance before white snow began to fall at day's end. It seemed that this year's winter was exactly as Rong-yu had predicted, blanketing the area in freezing snow as he and the others slowly looked up at the sky. The sky had turned as black as ink as white snowflakes drifted down incessantly, while on this side, the wolf was gradually entering labor. Her body shuddered from the intense pain, causing the alpha wolf to become extremely worried as he quickly raised his head to the sky and let out an incredibly strange howl. The alpha wolf and the rest of the pack sprinted forward at full speed with determination in their eyes, while nearby, the territorial beasts were still fast asleep amidst the freezing winter air. Sensing that something was amiss, the alpha hyena quickly looked up and hurried forward to assess the situation just as the wolves suddenly charged forward. Before the hyena could react, the alpha wolf bit it directly in the neck, causing it to collapse painfully to the ground as its life came to an end. The loud commotion caused the other hyenas to quickly scramble to their feet as the ferocious wolves snarled, and both sides lunged into battle without a moment's hesitation. The hyenas refused to be outdone and fought back relentlessly, but the alpha wolf suddenly roared toward the heavens, prompting the remaining wolves to attack with even greater ferocity. Finally, after a short while, most of the hyenas had been defeated, leaving the once peaceful area completely submerged in the relentless, freezing snow. On this side, the one-eared wolf remained standing perfectly still, doing his best to guard the female wolf as she neared the time of birth. The female wolf's entire body trembled from the agonizing pain, while the one-eared wolf, startled by a familiar sound, quickly moved ahead to lead the way for her. At the same time, the white alpha wolf returned with several small hyenas, which they promptly set aside. Drawn by the scent of blood, black crows began to gather, their numbers steadily increasing as they approached. Once again, a thick blanket of snow shrouded everything, while three mischievous children gazed out at the white-filled sky. The sight left the three children in awe as they discussed the relentless snowfall and biting wind. Feeling the chill of a true winter, they quickly shut the door. Nearby, a man let out a helpless sigh, remarking that the storm was still continuing despite their preparations, while everyone else remained anxious. Then the handsome young man smiled and told them not to worry before suggesting they fetch more food, prompting everyone to head over and retrieve their stored supplies. Even a short trip for food left their faces dusted with cold snow, and upon their return, all three wore expressions of utter bewilderment. Seeing this, the children rushed forward to brush the snow off them. As time passed, everyone eagerly enjoyed the flavors of the food, with Rong-yu and the others savoring the delicious meal. The snow continued to fall with an extreme, biting chill, after which the children soon lay down on the ground to prepare for sleep. Only Rong-yu remained awake as the snow persisted. He knew that the situation was still unfolding while the flakes continued to descend. With the power to bury everything, the snow fell incessantly, leaving the creatures outside shivering in the freezing white landscape. They could only huddle together to endure the harsh winter, with the wolves now forced to lie close to one another to preserve their only source of warmth. They pressed tightly against each other to block out the freezing wind, though one wolf among them had become utterly exhausted. After a period of labor, the mother wolf finally brought a new life into the world, followed by a second and then a third pup. The mother wolf happily turned to lick her newborns as if welcoming them, while the surrounding wolves approached in surprise to inspect the litter. The white alpha wolf quickly raised its head and looked forward as if signaling something, letting out a howl that pierced the silence of the dark night. Heavy snow continued to blanket the area as time drifted toward the early hours of the following morning, with the snowfall showing no signs of stopping. As the days went by, the freezing snow seemed endless, but after an unknown amount of time, the downfall finally began to subside. After months of waiting, the sun finally rose high into the sky, and the villagers excitedly used sticks to clear the snow away from their tents. The adults excitedly prepared for the hunt, and as Spiky and the others finished gearing up, the handsome man turned to urge the children along. "Hurry up, children, let's go!" Zhang Yu signaled Gyuli excitedly as the village warriors began their slow march forward, weapons in hand. Gyuli's radiant excitement brought a smile to Zhang Yu's face, and upon spotting something in the distance, he quickly pointed it out to her. She stared in amazement at the antlers protruding from the frozen snow, drawing the rest of the group in to investigate the find. Spiky cautiously cleared away the snow, recoiling in surprise when he revealed the frozen, lifeless body of a deer. The villagers were unable to mask their shock and began talking amongst themselves as Zhang Yu approached to see if the animal had simply frozen to death. Seeing the animal was frozen stiff, a young boy called out to his father, Ma Yan, who hurried over to inspect the situation for himself. Squinty stood frozen, unsure of how to handle the dead deer, while the rest of the group remained silent and indecisive for a long moment. The silence soon broke into a flurry of questions as the villagers wondered if they should bring the carcasses back, leaning in to inspect them further. They debated if the meat was edible or too heavy to transport, but Zhang Yu, realizing their intent, stepped forward to stop them. His intervention left Spiky and the others baffled, and even Gyuli looked confused as she gestured toward the meat, asking if they could eat it. He firmly refused, and when Gyuli turned to tell the villagers that the meat was forbidden, they immediately asked for a reason. Zhang Yu tried to convey his concerns. First, the time and cause of death were unknown, and second, the carcass could be infested with bacteria. His face grew serious as he explained it might be rotten inside, but the language barrier left him feeling helpless until Gyuli suddenly raised her hand. She looked at Zhang Yu and tried to interpret his actions, attempting to explain the uncertainty surrounding how and when the deer had died. Once she understood his point, she quickly translated for the crowd, explaining that they couldn't eat it because they didn't know when it died. The villagers looked at one another in contemplation until Spiky finally spoke up and agreed that the children's warning made sense. Left with no choice, the man ordered them to abandon the carcasses and only take the intact hides before they continued under the rising sun. Following the trail of footprints through the snow, Spiky and his group resumed their hunt until a sudden snowslide nearly swept Gyuli away. Fortunately, Zhang Yu reacted quickly and pulled her to safety, and as the others helped her up, they realized they had reached the edge of a cliff. Yan Mayan quickly turned back to signal the group to form a line. Then he continued walking forward and told them to follow his lead. After some time, the scene shifted to the inside of the tent, where the naive girl looked at the food before her and asked a curious question. "How long will this last?" she wondered, prompting the village elder to think for a moment before walking outside and telling her it might be a month. "Or perhaps 2, he added, making her even more worried as she asked if spring would arrive by then. But the elder just shook his head helplessly and said he didn't know. He had never seen or experienced such a long winter before, and a short while later, everyone discovered something unusual. Huan Fa shouted for everyone to come over, and they all rushed forward to find 2 cold corpses lying there, drawing everyone's immediate attention. They discussed whether the pair had frozen to death, but as Curie moved closer, he was surprised to realize that they were women. Suddenly, Rong Yu noticed something strange and pointed at the bodies to alert Ding Tu, who saw 2 bite marks on the skin of the deceased. Ding Tu immediately identified the wounds as being caused by a wild beast, which made Baozi feel uneasy as he wondered if it was a tiger. Huan Fa speculated that it might have been a leopard, but the older man examined the wounds more closely and disagreed with that assessment. It seemed the man had realized something as he identified the marks as wolf teeth, causing everyone present to react with shock. Rong Yu silently looked at the two pitiful corpses, a man and a woman of similar age who were likely a married couple. He felt deeply confused and wondered how things had ended up this way, questioning if they had been attacked by wolves as his mind flashed back to the past. A young boy had whined to his mother about being hungry, leading the saddened father to decide that they would go find food while telling the boy to watch his sibling. The two siblings could only cry as their parents left, having no choice but to endure, though this was all just Rong Yu's speculation about the couple searching for food. That would explain how they encountered a pack of starving wolves during the long winter. But Rong Yu quickly dismissed the thought, finding it strange that they only had one bite mark each. If they were prey, they would have been torn apart, but since the bodies were intact, the wolves clearly didn't intend to eat them, leading him to another theory. Perhaps they had caught something, and the wolves had stolen it from them. A thought that made Rong Yu's eyes light up as he realized it made more sense. He signaled to the others, who looked at him with bewildered faces, and after some time had passed, Ding Tu nodded in agreement with Rong Yu's deduction. Fury stood to the side and shared his own pensive thoughts, suggesting that since only two people were hunting, they must have come from a small family. Aside from these two, only the elderly or children likely remained. She turned back to Rong Yu and asked, "Right." The adults present looked at the two corpses pensively, sighing as they speculated that the pair had been searching for food for their children. "How tragic, they likely didn't expect winter to last this long," someone remarked. Hearing this, she quickly urged everyone to start searching for the survivors. Frizzy Hair stood to the side, wondering how they would find them without knowing where they came from. But Yan Mayan shook his head and insisted they would succeed. This piqued everyone's curiosity as to how, so he pointed upward and showed them a red string he had spotted tied high up. It was tied to a tree branch, prompting questions about what it was. He speculated it was a trail marker to prevent getting lost, and Tu Ding seemed to realize its purpose. Because of the heavy snowfall, they left markers to avoid getting lost, Tu Ding realized, just as Frizzy Hair ran ahead and shouted that he found another one, leading the group to follow the red trail. As Rong Yu walked, he worriedly wondered if they were still alive or if it was too late to save them. But after a long trek, the group finally neared their destination. Suddenly, Rong Yu spotted something and shouted while pointing downward, prompting the others to rush over and discover a small hut nestled at the foot of the mountain. Driven by curiosity, they cautiously approached the dwelling, and when Tu Ding carefully opened the door, he found two children fast asleep, unaware of the tragedy. An older man quickly stepped forward to check on the children, and after feeling for a pulse on their necks, he confirmed they were merely in a deep slumber. While the others watched anxiously from behind, Tu Ding turned back with a smile to announce that they were still warm and alive, bringing a collective sigh of relief to the group. Fury urged them to bring the children home immediately, so they carried the sleeping boy back as the sky began to fade into the evening twilight. Inside the hut, the adults stood watching the young boy intently while both children remained lost in a peaceful sleep, oblivious to their circumstances. Bao Zai and his companions also drew closer to observe, and just as they sensed something was amiss, the two children slowly opened their eyes. Startled by the sight of so many strangers, the children woke in a fright, prompting Gai Wu to chuckle and announce that they were finally awake. The unfamiliar faces left the children bewildered as they asked who everyone was, so the group began introducing themselves with names like Moon and Stars. Still gripped by fear, the children frantically looked around for their parents, leaving Curie at a loss for how to tell them that they had passed away. She told the children directly that they had found their parents after a wolf attack on the mountain, and upon hearing this, the poor children could only wail and scream for their mother and father. Overcome with pity, everyone rushed to comfort them, and a short while later, a familiar meal was prepared for the grieving pair. Thin slices of meat were roasted over the fire, and once the children's tears subsided, Gai Wu offered them food, which they began to devour ravenously as if they were starving. Buzzcut laughed and offered another bite, while Rong Yu watched the two children with a smile, finally feeling at ease as the night deepened. All the children in the area were fast asleep, including the two little ones who remained blissfully unaware of the situation. Inside the adults' tent, the lamps remained lit as Jia Ling sat before the fire, lost in deep thought. Yan Mayan coldly announced his opposition, and the little girl followed suit, while Buzzcut suggested that finding more people would be better, a sentiment the mother quickly echoed. She pointed out that others might be out there unable to survive the winter, which left the village elder feeling deeply conflicted. Rong Yu suddenly signaled to Jia Ling, leaving the elder confused, though Curie, sitting right beside him, quickly understood that having more people would be beneficial. She found it hard to understand how it would be better, but Rong Yu only offered a radiant smile, leaving squinty eyes and frizzy hair puzzled about his meaning. As Rong Yu continued to gesture, Curie translated his determined expression, explaining that his goal was to gather as many people as possible. She laughed and gestured forward, quickly relaying his thoughts to everyone that they would become much stronger this way. He added that they could hunt larger prey, earning a praiseful head pat from Jia Ling, as the villagers considered the idea before preparing for the hunt the next morning. Curie and Rong Yu were fully equipped for the hunt, and along with the three Baozi, they stood ready to begin their expedition. The group set out under the high sun, where a cute rabbit was busy foraging until an arrow suddenly struck it. This brought great joy to members of another tribe, who exclaimed that they had caught it before heading back with their prize. Suddenly, the familiar footsteps of giant wolves appeared, silencing the tribesmen as they realized they were completely surrounded. The wolves looked ferocious and ready to tear them apart, but the bearded man signaled for everyone to stay calm, insisting there was no danger. He forced a smile and reassured them that wolves rarely attack humans, only for a wolf to lunge at him immediately, forcing him to block it with his staff. The bearded man stared in disbelief, wondering why the wolves were acting this way as he hurriedly looked around. Fortunately, he managed to use his staff to fend off the vicious wolf, forcing the beast to retreat to the side. The situation grew more baffling to the bearded man, as the pack completely hemmed in his group. Knowing that wolves never attacked humans with such ferocity, the bearded man began to shout as the beasts grew even more menacing. Drawing closer, the solitary rabbit had already perished unnoticed. As it turned out, the wolves were only targeting the rabbit off to the side. Its gaze grew incredibly fierce, prompting the bearded man to sternly warn everyone not to show any weakness while the wolves continued to stare them down. Chang asked fearfully, "Father, what should we do?" as the group refused to give up. Sensing something, the man told him to hand over the rabbit, and despite his curiosity, Chang obeyed. Upon seeing the rabbit, the wolf's demeanor became even more aggressive, which only served to confirm the bearded man's suspicions about his next move. He solemnly instructed his sons that once he threw the rabbit, they were to run in the opposite direction immediately. Both of them nodded in agreement, and after giving his orders, the bearded man hurled the rabbit into the air. At the same time, the three of them sprinted in the opposite direction with grave expressions, while the wolves lunged toward the small rabbit's carcass. After fleeing through the vast forest for a long while, they were all completely exhausted. Feeling somewhat relieved, Chang looked back and noted that they weren't being followed, though the archer couldn't help but regret losing the rabbit they had worked so hard to catch. He sighed and replied that they had to leave the rabbit behind to survive, for keeping it would have meant death for them all, before the archer turned his attention back to the bearded man. "What now? We need to catch something," he said, and seeing no other choice, the man stood up and announced they would have to start their search all over again. The three of them continued their exploration, discussing what they would do if the wolves returned, concluding that they would simply have to run again. Meanwhile, Buzzcut's group was also moving forward, and he quickly asked Mayan Yan if he noticed anything strange, though the latter was still confused and asked, "What?" The boss looked around in confusion at the lack of animals and sighed, speculating that it was likely due to the continuous snowfall. Sensing something was wrong, his expression shifted as Mayan Yan hurriedly signaled for everyone to wait, leaving them puzzled as he continued to gesture for them to stay still. Everyone immediately went on high alert and scanned their surroundings as a strange rustling sound emanated from the bushes ahead. Frizzy heard it all and turned to Squinty in surprise, asking if it was a person, while Buzzcut nodded in agreement from the front. Confirming it was the sound of footsteps, they all continued forward, though Bao asked a worried question at that moment. He wondered if their sudden appearance would frighten the others, while Squinty added his concern that they might even be attacked. Jiang Yu began to contemplate his options and signaled to the group, who all looked back at him with bewildered expressions. He repeatedly clapped his hands to get their attention, suggesting they use it as a signal, and once they understood Jiang Yu's plan, Squinty and Frizzy joined him in clapping to the rhythm. On this side, the bearded man and his two companions were also hearing strange noises as they searched the area in confusion. Upon detecting signs of humans, the bearded man quickly clapped his hands, his curiosity piqued by the sound as he called out, "Is it a sound like this? Stay right where you are." He continued to clap his hands, an action that left Bao completely bewildered. I heard a sound just like that." Buzzcut nodded in agreement, and soon everyone began clapping their hands as they walked along. The bearded man also joined in, clapping along with the others until the two groups finally met face to face, where Zhang Yu and Kili reached out to greet them. On this side, the bearded man and his group quickly returned the gesture, while Mayan Yan hurriedly placed his weapon on the ground to signal they were safe as both sides began chatting enthusiastically. After a while, both parties were talking excitedly, and the archer along with Manhwa were moved to tears as they savored the jerky they were given. Buzzcut smiled as he watched the bearded man's joyful expression, and a short time later, the bearded man slowly began to recount their story. We worked so hard to catch a rabbit, but then a pack of wolves appeared. Hearing this, Mayan Yan seemed to understand and asked if the prey had been stolen from them. Buzzcut's face turned pensive as he recalled the events, noting how strange it was that the wolves had also attacked the people first when they met that other couple. The wolves' strange behavior left the bearded man feeling utterly perplexed, but suddenly, Zhang Yu stood up and shouted repeatedly to signal the others. Billy slowly stood up and asked with a smile if they had any other family members, to which the archer and Manhwa quickly replied that their mother and a baby were still at home. Zhang Yu nodded enthusiastically at the news, and Kyuli translated his words to suggest they leave immediately, leading the group to continue their journey forward. This time, they were accompanied by the bearded man, and everyone integrated well as they chatted together quite happily along the way. The mother wolf was still diligently nursing her cubs, but sensing that something was amiss, she suddenly turned her head to look to the side. The white alpha wolf and the others had returned with food, making the mother wolf very happy as the alpha wolf tore off a rabbit leg and carefully offered it to her. Having worked so hard to care for the cubs, the mother wolf quickly took the large leg in her mouth, while the remaining cubs continued to play around the alpha wolf. After finishing her meal, the mother wolf raised her head to the sky and howled, signaling the cubs to quickly approach her. They hurriedly began to nurse like well-behaved puppies, while on the other side, the alpha wolf quickly signaled the rest of the pack. The wolves rushed over to tear into their delicious dinner, and although the food was scarce, it was their only meal of the day. The scene shifted back to the others, where the children stood waiting outside the tent as Buzzcut and the bearded man stepped inside, leaving the woman there completely bewildered. The bearded man quickly sat down to recount the events to his wife, while Curie approached with a smile and offered them a handful of fruit. After tasting the strange fruit, she laughed with delight and thanked them, and a short while later, the group continued their journey forward. The bearded man's family of 3 was overjoyed to be together as they returned to the familiar tents, a sight that left his companions in awe while the archer stared in amazement at the massive dwellings. The Buzzcut man smiled as he explained how to set up the thick wooden pillars, and when he curiously asked about the heavy hide covering, the elder laughed and identified it as Voimerdern skin. It seemed to be his first time hearing of a Voimerdern, and as he wondered what it was, Curie quickly led the woman and child toward another area. She showed them the sleeping quarters for the adults and children before leading them outside to the storage area, leaving the woman startled by the sight. Surprised by the existence of a storehouse, Curie then took them to the armory, where the sight of the weapons stunned both the long-haired man and the archer as she laughed and led them further. The sight of the food reserves in the warehouse left everyone astonished, and the two of them couldn't hide their excitement at how delicious everything looked. As evening approached, the Buzzcut man and Mayan Yan skillfully sliced large pieces of meat with rapid movements, while the village women distributed cabbage among themselves. Large slabs of meat were carefully roasted over the fire, and after hot stones were pressed onto the food sacks, everyone settled in to wait. Anticipation filled every face as they watched the food bags, until Rong Yu suddenly remembered something and turned his head in surprise. Seeing the 2 orphaned children waiting quietly for their meal brought him a sense of relief, and he noticed the 2 newcomers from the other tribe were also beginning to settle in. Once the food was ready, everyone happily announced it was time to eat, and skewers of meat were handed out to each person. The 2 well-behaved children looked on with great anticipation as they received their meat, and everyone began enjoying the meal together in high spirits. Recalling something, the bearded man smiled and praised them for their ability to store such a vast amount of food, to which Jia Lang calmly replied. He explained that they had been continuously gathering supplies in preparation for a winter they feared might never end, and as time passed, the night grew late. While eating, the bearded man's wife curiously asked why they thought that, prompting Jia Lang to point toward Rong Yu, who was still devouring his food. With a gentle smile, Jia Lang informed them that the boy had been the one to warn them, a revelation that left the members of the other tribe momentarily stunned. Even the 2 young children looked at him with admiration, making Rong Yu feel a bit bashful when he noticed everyone's gaze fixed upon him. Outside, the temperature plummeted even further as Curie reached out to check the weather, sighing as she saw the snow falling once more. The 4 of them looked ahead in a daze as the dark sky continued to pour down freezing snow, signaling that night had returned, and it was time for everyone to sleep. Seeing this, the boy nicknamed Floor Mop laughed and cheered joyfully at the large crowd, pointing his finger to count each person. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He laughed in pure excitement at the high number, while the girl beside him teased that he could only count up to 5. This made Floor Mop shout back in frustration, insisting he could count higher as he began pointing his fingers again. 1, 2, Just then, the silly girl and the handsome man entered with smiles, telling everyone to make way as they quickly set down the warming stones. The other children excitedly gathered around to inspect the stones, which were radiating a steady heat, while the handsome man cautioned them not to touch yet, as they were still very hot. As another freezing night passed in that place, the handsome man picked up a stone and felt its temperature, murmuring that it should be ready now. Seeing this, the silly girl handed out 2 warming stones to each child, who cheered with joy upon feeling the warmth in their hands. Rongyu also obediently reached out to receive a stone, thinking to himself in surprise how truly warm it felt as he gazed at the heat radiating from his palms. After stepping outside, the silly girl and the handsome man smiled and told the children to sleep well, while the little ones drifted into a deep slumber, clutching their warming stones tightly. Shaggy Hair playfully held up the deer head to tease the others, while the boy and the rest of the group continued their games as Faded Hair rushed forward. After the stick struck him, Shaggy Hair's face twisted in pain, and the boy tumbled to the ground, prompting the surrounding children to burst into laughter. Even the 2 orphaned children nearby joined in the laughter until Shaggy Hair suddenly noticed something and cried out that their father had returned, sending the children racing toward him. Seeing the weary expressions on everyone's faces left Shaggy Hair disappointed as Squinty Eyes sighed helplessly and announced that they had found nothing. The boy kept running after them to ask about rabbits, but Curie apologized for the lack of luck before Crew Cut spoke up as he remembered something. When asked how long they had been there, Calm Face shook his head helplessly and noted it had been a long time, causing the older man to let out a weary breath. Bearded Man offered some gentle comfort by saying they would catch something tomorrow, and in the blink of an eye, the next morning arrived. Crew Cut's group set out to hunt once more, while Bearded Man and his teammates continued to put in every effort as time passed. Bao's voice sounded dejected as he wondered if the animals had burrowed underground, frustrated that he could find nothing despite searching everywhere nearby. Messy Hair agreed that wildlife had become incredibly scarce, and the group eventually made their way back to their starting point. The village elder looked somber and at a loss for words while Gai Wu stood beside him, pondering how much longer they could endure this. The elder shook his head with a grave expression and estimated they might last another month before turning his gaze back toward the young girl. When asked about the plants in the fields, Gai Wu turned back and sighed as she reported that the rhinos and cattle seemed to have eaten everything. This news left the elder standing in deep thought about their misfortune as another day passed, and the scene shifted to the late evening. Crew Cut's group returned empty-handed and dejected, their faces etched with silent sorrow, as the young girl watched them with disappointment, while Calm Face confirmed they caught nothing. As their remaining food supplies dwindled day by day, the young girl could not help but let out a heavy sigh at the sight of what little was left. Standing nearby, Rongwu stared at the broccoli on the ground and wondered to himself if it would grow back if he planted it in the soil. Rongwu envisioned a future where he planted these vegetables, but the harsh reality of their situation struck him like a physical blow. He realized nothing could grow in this winter cold, and his group walked away in despair, consumed by thoughts of giving up. The broccoli remained there in silence, as if telling a story of how the human revolution had unfortunately yet to begin. As the night grew late, Zhu Qin suggested they attempt to hunt further away, his expression becoming exceptionally serious. He mentioned a massive mountain across the river that remained unexplored, but the village elder immediately rejected the idea without a second thought. He forbade them from going there, a sharp reaction that made everyone turn to look before the village elder sighed and gravely informed them that tigers lived there. This news left Rongyu startled and in disbelief as he began to envision the terrifying sight of those ferocious tigers. He realized the grim reality that their current numbers were insufficient to defeat a tiger, leading Gai Wu to suggest they try hunting animals in the fields instead. Upon hearing this, Dao Ding asked in surprise if they had any idea what kind of creatures inhabited those fields. The young girl quickly calculated and announced there were rhinoceroses, her dazed expression leaving the older man completely bewildered. He wondered if such massive and fierce beasts could even be caught, while Mayan Yan nodded and agreed that the field animals were all enormous and violent. Gai Wu shared his thoughts, noting they weren't necessarily aggressive, though he admitted they would become ferocious if they were attacked. This information left Rongyu confused, as he immediately thought of modern-day cattle and wondered if that was what they were discussing. His eyes lit up at the thought of a delicious meal, unable to bear the fact that they had been eating dried meat when beef was available. He stood up and shouted with a serious face while gesturing to everyone, leaving those around him utterly confused about what was happening. Curie looked at him blankly before smiling and translating for the others, saying that since they were many, they would surely be able to catch them. This news left everyone deep in thought, and by the next morning, they had all set out to begin their hunting expedition. Mayan Dao pointed ahead and announced the presence of the cattle, as the black beasts with long horns immediately caught Rong Yu's attention. His expression soured as he looked at their aggressive appearance, silently realizing that these were not the kind of cows he had expected. He wondered why they were so massive and gave a forced smile, doubting if they could be caught while recalling what Dao Ding had said the previous night. He told everyone that catching just one would be enough, but they worried its hide was too thick for one spear. So Rong Yu gestured that multiple stabs would work as Ma Zai watched curiously. They wondered if the cattle would simply stand still, prompting Rong Yu to recall something and begin making strange noises. He reached out to explain with a grave expression, and his intense demeanor immediately caught Curie's attention. She smiled and informed everyone that they could capture the prey without an attack, leaving the bearded man nearby in a daze, as Yan Mayan looked at Rong Yu in confusion, wondering how they could catch them without fighting. Cows? Everyone's eyes sparkled with an inexplicable light as they asked how it was possible, while the bearded man spoke up in bewilderment. Capture them without killing. Even Yan Mayan was confused about the method, so Rong Yu quickly picked up a wooden stick. He used the stick to draw on the ground, and seeing this, everyone gathered around to watch, though the crude sketches on the dirt left them feeling a bit puzzled. Everyone looked as confused as children, while Rong Yu continued sketching his plan on the ground, which revealed that he intended to dig a pit for the cattle to fall into. Seeing the plan, everyone burst into surprised laughter as Messy Hair quickly told the group that he had seen this kind of drawing before. The scene shifted to the following morning as everyone waited for an opportunity, while the aggressive cattle remained gathered there in an irritable state. Rong Yu secretly glanced toward Buzzcut, suddenly recalling the previous incident involving himself and the fat man. Indeed, it was just like last time. Back then, the fat man's eyes were filled with intense longing as he stared at the goats lying still. But returning to reality, Rong Yu realized that to hunt, one must first understand the prey. As sunlight bathed the area, he realized he couldn't research anything here and had to rely on his own observations until Buzzcut suddenly announced that they were moving. The cattle slowly headed in one direction while the group followed stealthily, and after a while, the herd began drinking from the river. The group continued to monitor every movement until Yan Mayan reported that they were drinking, and in the blink of an eye, night had fallen. The cattle finally fell into a deep sleep, prompting Yan Mayan to wave his hand and signal for everyone to return to their secret location. Yan Mayan picked up a stick and drew symbols on the ground, explaining that they gathered in one spot before moving to another to drink. Everyone watched intently as he explained they slept there, their faces turning serious until the bearded man asked where they should dig the pit. He used his familiar stick once more to point to a spot ahead, and everyone gathered to examine the plan he had laid out. By the next morning, Buzzcut was holding branches and instructing everyone to gather leaves and wood in that spot. Everyone began working together, and within a short time, a mountain of branches had been piled up before they returned to digging the earth. Buzzcut focused seriously on digging the soil while Rong Yu and Curie watched silently from behind. Though the more he watched, the more speechless Rong Yu became. He realized that working this way would take forever, and as everyone continued to dig with stones, night fell without any sign of progress. Even after an entire day, the massive pit remained unfinished, leaving everyone exhausted until a sudden sound made them turn to see Tu Ding and the others returning with shovels. Rong Yu's eyes instantly lit up at the sight of the shovels, and he stepped forward with the others to inspect them, thinking it was perfect. Everyone resumed their digging with renewed focus, and by the following morning, the pit had grown significantly as Tu Ding and the group looked on thoughtfully. Rong Yu and Gyuli smiled and signaled to the others, while the uncle quickly reminded them that they needed to cover the trap before the herd arrived. Everyone hurried into position to conceal the pit, with Gyuli carefully layering soil to make it look natural while Rong Yu worked alongside her, continuously shoveling snow over it. Finally, the massive trap was perfectly camouflaged against the ground, and everyone waited with bated breath to see if their plan would actually work. Another day passed, and by evening, they were all lying flat on the ground, anxiously watching for any sign of movement until they finally noticed something approaching. Mi Yan quickly alerted the group that the herd was coming, and the beasts slowly plodded toward them, still unaware of the trap hidden beneath the earth. Rong Yu became incredibly nervous and began to pray silently, pleading for the beasts to move closer to the pit as he whispered another plea. Unfortunately, The herd did not walk directly into the hole but veered off to the side, leaving everyone in a state of desperate frustration as they cursed their luck. As Rong Yu clutched his head in despair, Huan Fa stood up to declare their failure, but Mayan Yan quickly signaled him to sit back down, insisting it wasn't over yet. It seemed he had anticipated their behavior, believing they would return if the group remained patient, prompting Rong Yu to steal a glance toward Mayan Yan. He turned toward Gyuli and saw a smile on her face, which made him realize there was no need for despair as hope surged within his heart once more. They waited until late into the night when Tu Ding finally alerted everyone that the herd was making its way back toward them. As the beasts advanced step by step, Rong Yu watched with intense focus and anticipation, realizing that they were indeed returning to the trap. He could only pray to the heavens, pleading for success this time as the herd continued to move forward, still completely oblivious to the danger lurking ahead. To his dismay, the lead beasts walked right past the edge of the pit again, making Rong Yu feel as though all their efforts were about to go to waste. Suddenly, one of the beasts accidentally tumbled into the hidden pit, prompting Mayan Yan to shout the command to attack as everyone charged forward with their weapons. They leaped high into the air and struck with the spears they had prepared, while Rong Yu's gaze had turned incredibly sharp and determined. Finally, he managed to drive his weapon into the beast's eye, and a triumphant smile spread across his face as he saw their plan succeeding. Thought 81 just as calculated. The trap caught the ox, but he still wondered how they would transport it back with their current numbers. At that moment, the man with the buzz cut signaled everyone to come closer and observe as he focused his attention on the buffalo's thick hide. The first step was to skin it, and the older man demonstrated the motions, starting with slitting the throat while Rong Yu watched the scene intently. Next came the gutting, which caused him to reflect as he recalled his father's smile. The fat man had done the exact same thing, though Rong Yu had only watched him with confusion back then. He had wondered what on earth his father was doing skinning it there, baffled by his actions and questioning if the man was some kind of pervert obsessed with hides. Only now did he understand the fat man's actions. Even then, his father had been preparing for winter and the future, a realization that left Rong Yu's gaze filled with exhaustion. He sighed in self-reproach, feeling foolish and pathetic for not realizing it sooner, knowing that regret only comes after the experience has passed. Seeing him so lost in thought, the man with the buzz cut noticed and asked if he was crying out of joy for the kill, then urged him to stop weeping and hold the hide while Curie asked a surprised question on the way back. "Are you crying?" Curie asked, as the large slabs of meat were finally stacked neatly to the side and everyone began hauling their spoils back home. As the sky gradually transitioned into the next morning, the children and the rest of the tribe waited with great anticipation. Seeing the familiar figures return, everyone cheered joyfully at the sight of the ox, while stones were quickly heated over the fire as usual. The mothers busied themselves with the vegetables, while the husbands used stones to slice the meat, placing the savory pieces to roast over the open flames. The children waited excitedly with laughter, remarking on how delicious it looked, while Rong Yu watched silently, suddenly remembering that his desires in his past life had never been that grand. Back then, his life had become incredibly difficult as he struggled for a peaceful existence with his family, his phone ringing incessantly at the time. Answering the call, he asked what was wrong, only for his wife to sigh and explain that Su-ah had spat out all her porridge, likely because it wasn't to her taste. Despite that, the girl seemed strangely happy, but Rong Yu hadn't cared about such things then, believing it wasn't a problem he could solve. He told her he was too busy to talk, and sensing the coldness in his voice, his weary wife lamented that they hadn't even shared a meal together lately. Rong Yu countered by telling her to endure a bit longer, promising everything would be fine once this job was over, but his wife seemed to be losing her patience. She asked when exactly that would be, and after hanging up, she felt utterly exhausted as she had only been concerned with the present. Rong Yu simply continued his work, but whenever he returned home, they would argue incessantly, she about the present and he about the future. Things gradually worsened. A mutual divorce agreement had been prepared for Mr. Jin Zhangyu. The two eventually took their dispute to court, having finally lost their connection to one another. Time shifted to an evening inside a luxury apartment. Zhangyu was still clutching his head and trembling uncontrollably. When he looked up again, the man with the buzz cut handed him a piece of meat. Zhangyu took the meat in surprise as the older man smiled and gestured for him to eat. Upon hearing this, Zhangyu quickly began to savor the delicious morsel in his hand. The people around him chatted as they ate, remarking that it was delicious and even more tender than venison. After finishing his portion, the village elder thoughtfully noted that the beef was excellent. Although the children there had lost their parents, they ate with great joy. A warm smile spread across his face as he realized that this was what a true family felt like. Then, it was time for bed. He gazed up at the sky above as Zhang Yu lay there in deep reflection. His expression looked quite troubled, as if he had suddenly realized something of great importance. He recalled the scenes of everyone hunting together. Living and supporting one another like this was far better. He even remembered when the fat man stood up against the villains, but tragedy struck. Everyone was captured, and those cruel men executed the fat man right before his eyes. This filled Zhang Yu with immense rage, questioning why they had to be killed in such a manner. He thought back to the innocent faces of the children in this place. Curie and the children had found him drifting down the river. Then he instinctively remembered his former family. At that time, he seemed to have thought of something that connected the past to the present. A single thought remained in his heart. Those two must surely still be alive somewhere. But if they were alive, then the mastermind behind everything still exists as well, likely staying with that group. He wondered if their numbers were still as large as they used to be. Zhang Yu remained deeply immersed in his own thoughts. How many of them were there back then? 40 or 50? He sighed wearily, as if accepting the reality that he couldn't possibly win if he faced them now. Suddenly, Zhang Yu began to shake his head repeatedly. No, he told himself. For now, he had to focus on survival. Time gradually shifted toward the late afternoon, and it was time for the wolves to go out and hunt for food. They all searched the surrounding area for any sign of life, but by late night they had found nothing. Thus, another new day began. The wolves were forced to return empty-handed, their faces filled with helplessness. The alpha wolf sat down dejectedly, gazing at the young cubs. Its eyes were pensive, as if it were silently blaming itself for being useless. The scene shifted to the tribe's tents. Looking at the blazing fire before him, the man with the buzz cut spoke up. "It is time for us to move to another location. We should probably relocate." Mayan Yan, sitting right beside him, nodded in agreement. "That's true. There are no animals left to hunt in these mountains." Hearing this, another mother spoke up in surprise. "What if we move to the fields where we saw the cattle?" After a moment of silence, the village elder spoke. "The winds in those fields are too strong, so we cannot simply build houses there." Mayan Yan looked up in surprise and suggested, "If we build the houses at the foot of the mountain, they could be shielded from the wind. Wouldn't that work?" The elder tried to stifle a sigh as he replied, "It is fine for now." However, the elder also sensed that something was wrong. "But if our numbers increase, we will definitely need to move." In the blink of an eye, it was already late at night. Everyone huddled together in the tent and fell into a deep sleep. Manhwa sighed and grumbled about the lack of space. He quickly shoved the sleeping Baozi away to make more room for himself, and then everyone drifted back to sleep. On the other side, the cattle sprinted to escape the pursuing wolves. The alpha wolf was furious, seemingly unwilling to let its prey get away. Dozens of wolves quickly lunged forward and bit into the massive bull's body. Eventually, one bull collapsed, and seeing this, the alpha wolf turned to chase the others. The cattle could only try to run as fast as possible to save their lives. The alpha wolf refused to give up and kept howling. Meanwhile, the fallen bull continued to struggle desperately. Unfortunately, two of the bulls accidentally collided, creating a massive impact. The force of the crash immediately sent all the nearby animals flying into the air. The ill-fated bull lay on the ground in agony. Seeing this, the other predators quickly moved in to claim the meat. By the next morning, the group resumed their journey to search for food. It seemed Rong Yu had discovered something. He quickly pointed ahead and shouted. He had found a bull's carcass and rushed over to inspect it while the others used their weapons to drive the crows away. Half of the giant bull's carcass had been devoured, leaving only jagged bones. Du Ding leaned down to examine the remains and offered his assessment. This bull didn't die of natural causes. Judging by these wounds, something bit it repeatedly. This revelation piqued Baozi's curiosity. "A tiger?" Mayan Yan shook his head and continued his inspection. "There are too many bite marks. Tigers never hunt in packs." As everyone sat down to look at the poor creature that had been mauled to death, he realized something. Could it be a wolf pack? Du Ding pondered the suggestion. "Wolves!" Just then, Rong Yu suddenly cried out, drawing everyone's attention back to him once more. Manhwa asked in confusion, "What is it now? What's wrong?" Rong Yu continued to gesture frantically to the group. Upon understanding his message, Curie's face darkened with annoyance. "The wolves killed and ate our cattle." This surprised Yan Zai, who asked, "Our cattle?" The archer also nodded in agreement, noting that the cattle in the fields didn't actually belong to them. Rong Yu grew indignant as he recalled the laws of ownership. Article 5, Property Ownership through Possession. A person who possesses real estate publicly and continuously with the intent to own shall be recognized as the owner after registration. For personal property, if one possesses it in good faith, publicly and continuously, ownership is granted. The herd on the field was not private property. Realizing the flaw in his logic, Rong Yu was momentarily startled. That's right, the cattle on the field aren't actually personal property. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the group continued their trek. Sensing that something was amiss, Rong Yu turned his head to scan the surroundings. Isn't this where we set our traps? The sight before him made him freeze in his tracks. Huh! A group of people had gathered right next to the pit. Seeing this, Rong Yu and the others hurried over. Their faces were etched with exhaustion after the long journey they had endured. The group nearby continued to glare at them with hostility, and seeing Rong Yu staring intently at him, Mei spoke up to ask what was wrong. What is it? Curie grumbled irritably, claiming the pit belonged to them. But Zai refused to back down and replied that nature belongs to no one. We were the ones who found it, he said, infuriating her, while Bao Zai and the others quickly stepped forward and pointed at the hole to make an announcement. They declared that the pit was theirs because they had dug it, leaving the bystanders bewildered as they questioned if the group had truly dug the hole themselves. Ding Tu and the other adults remained standing there calmly, and after a brief silence, the people on the opposite side spoke up in astonishment. They wondered why such a massive pit had been dug, and later, as everyone sat to talk, Ding Tu and his group began setting traps, which Mei doubted would be effective. Huan Fa flashed a smug grin at his skepticism as evening approached, and the group hid nearby to quietly monitor the situation. Rong Yu turned to look at Mei, who was puzzled, while Curie told him to watch closely, leaving him with no choice but to sigh and comply as the wild cattle approached. Everyone waited in silence as the animals drew near, and Rong Yu and Mei watched with anticipation to see what would happen next. The cattle continued their advance but bypassed the pit entirely, causing Mei to smirk and ask if they really expected to catch anything that way. Rong Yu snapped back in anger, and though Mei didn't understand him, he sighed as the adults watched the scene with grim expressions. Ultimately, the herd moved past the pit and took another path, rendering their hard work useless, and Mei looked at Rong Yu with a look of disdain. He was incensed but powerless to act, while Yan Mayan suggested they wait until nightfall when the animals would likely return through the same area. Ran was surprised by the idea of waiting until dark for the Renbo to return, but suddenly, Huan Fa looked around as Zhao Yan peered off to the side. He pointed ahead to draw their attention to a herd of mammoths approaching, a sight that made Mei's face light up with excitement. Rong Yu was startled by the appearance of the massive creatures and wondered if they were truly mammoths before shouting out a signal. The boy beside him remained thrilled and full of anticipation, thinking about how these were the largest animals on the entire plain. Mei grabbed his gear and handed a staff to Rong Yu before charging toward the mammoths, urging him to join the pursuit. Rong Yu was still confused by the sudden turn of events, while Curie watched them run off in a panic, asking where they were going as Mei sped ahead. He shouted that they should catch the mammoths since they were larger than the cattle, ignoring Curie's worries, while Shuai Ji watched in shock. What is it? Where are they? Even Buzzcut looked back in confusion. The bearded man pointed forward, looking bewildered. It seems they are chasing the mammoth herd. The handsome youth turned back in shock upon seeing this. What? All three children had quickly pursued the mammoths. This caused Buzzcut to shout out in extreme worry while the older man sighed helplessly. They don't seem to hear us. Saddleface asked in surprise, shouldn't we chase them immediately? While everyone was still unsure of what to do. Mustache Man stepped forward with a smile and announced that his children were very stubborn. They would return after following for a while, leaving the other two staring at each other in silence. They could only gaze at the sky before them, wondering how long the chase would last. On this side, Lip Guy turned back and explained that they would stop once they got bored. Rong Yu also looked around and realized the three of them had wandered far from the adults. Being so far from the grown-ups was very dangerous. This made him feel pensive, thinking it was too risky for the children to be there. Meanwhile, the adults gradually moved in one direction as Squinty Eyes searched the surroundings in surprise. Where did the children go? The sky gradually grew darker, and the sight before them made Rong Yu and the other two smile instantly. The mammoths still foraging for food caught their attention. They are eating so heartily. He turned back to chat, noting how well-behaved they were while drinking water. They aren't fighting anymore. Curie, standing right beside him, nodded in agreement. That's right. On this side, Rong Yu sensed that something was wrong. He hurriedly stood up and signaled to the other two. This left Lip Guy completely bewildered as he asked what was happening. He signaled for silence and quickly pointed ahead. The boy was still confused and didn't understand what was going on, asking what that was. Curie seemed to have discovered something from the side of the forest. Look, 3 figures of adults appeared right in front of them. This caused the 3 of them to discuss in great surprise. There are people there. The long-haired man pointed forward as if giving a silent signal. This made Rong Yu freeze for a moment. That man is. He suddenly recalled the scene when his previous family was captured. And this long-haired man was one of those blue-faced villains who committed evil deeds. Yes, it was him. This realization filled Rong Yu with intense rage. Sensing that something was amiss, he turned his head in surprise. A plume of smoke rising from behind caught his attention. Smoke. Could the others also be in the forest? Various thoughts raced through Rong Yu's mind. It is far too dangerous here. Fortunately, the other side hasn't noticed us yet. His gaze gradually became determined. We must run. Rong Yu put his hand to his mouth to signal the other 2. Seeing this gesture, Curie understood. Are we heading back quietly? He smiled and gave a gentle nod of agreement. The 3 of them stealthily stood up and hurried forward as voices calling out their names echoed continuously. This caused the blue-faced men to slowly turn around, making Rong Yu and his companions freeze as the long-haired man asked in surprise if they were humans, leaving Rong Yu no choice but to bolt forward and shout for them to run. Seeing this, the long-haired man waved his hand to signal his group, while the 3 of them fled at top speed, with Ku Li turning back to gesture to the others. Follow me, Du Mu said anxiously from the side, wondering what to do as the adults continued their relentless search for the 3 of them. Just look ahead and run, they told each other as the long-haired man handed an arrow to his subordinate, while the bald man slowly aimed his bow at the 3 children. Those 3 wicked men were targeting the children, forcing Rong Yu and his friends to sprint forward desperately to save their lives. The bald man behind them was still drawing his bow to fire, while the 3 of them pushed themselves to run as fast as possible, and Rong Yu asked in confusion, "They are just humans, so why must we flee?" Suddenly, an arrow struck right in front of them, and they turned back with terrified expressions. The long-haired man handed another arrow to the bald man, and seeing this, the 3 of them resumed their frantic escape. The bald man continued to aim his bow at them, and when his next arrow pierced a nearby branch, their fear only intensified. Du Mu turned back in shock and confusion, wondering why they were firing arrows, but Rong Yu said nothing and kept running forward. Eventually, the 3 of them disappeared into the forest, prompting the long-haired man to signal a halt since they were gone, though the bald man asked if they should pursue. He informed his companions that they should wait and observe the situation first, while the 3 children finally began to feel the weight of their exhaustion. Ku Li looked back in surprise, noting that they didn't seem to be followed, yet the recent events left all 3 of them deeply unsettled. As the sky faded into late evening, the 3 of them lay exhausted on the ground, with Rong Yu completely drained after their long, continuous flight. Recalling the incident, Du Mu wondered why they had shot at them, while Ku Li questioned if they intended to kill, leaving Rong Yu even more bewildered as to why humans would kill one another. As she sat in silent thought, Rong Yu recalled everything and realized that humans killing each other in this place was no ordinary matter. Back then, the fat man had tried to resist the leader of the blue-faced tribe, but that tribe had cold-bloodedly murdered them both. That was the reason for the fat man's tragic end. And at that thought, Rong Yu suddenly sat up and pointed back toward the path they had taken. The other 2 looked toward the forest in surprise, and Ku Li asked in astonishment if he was referring to the woods they had just left. Realizing the implication of his words, her expression grew solemn as Rong Yu picked up a stick and began drawing on the ground. A family of 5 soon took shape in the dirt, and as she grasped the situation, Rong Yu continued to draw incessantly with his sticks. The figures representing the thin and fat men were finally depicted as dead, causing her to nod in silent comprehension. Connecting the pieces of the story, she asked in shock if those people had murdered his family, and Rong Yu gave a helpless nod. His confirmation left them both pensive as time passed, until the others spotted the 3 children, and Buzzcut scolded them for chasing a mastodon. Mustache hurried over to check if the boy was injured, while Frizzy Hair approached with a smile to tease him about the adventure. Squinty Eyes laughed and asked if he had seen the mastodon, wondering how close he had actually gotten to the massive creature. He scratched his head sheepishly, unsure of how to explain but confirming he saw it, which allowed the adults to breathe a sigh of relief. They were glad he saw it, but Curie then spoke up to inform the group that they had also encountered other people. This news left everyone astonished as they questioned the presence of others, while she quickly stepped forward and placed a hand on Rong Yu's shoulder. With a voice full of sympathy, she explained they were the ones who killed Rong Yu's family, leaving everyone present completely stunned. Judging by their shocked faces, no one expected this, and soon night fell as delicious meat roasted over the open flames. The boys sat excitedly waiting for the meal, realizing they had used the pit as a trap, though Rong Yu remained somber in the corner. That past event clearly haunted him, and as he recalled their cruel faces, he wondered if those men still remembered his face. Noticing Rong Yu's deep contemplation, Curie approached with a smile and promised that they would always be there to protect him. Jia Lang also nodded and stepped closer to encourage him, and seeing their genuine care, a gentle smile finally appeared on Rong Yu's face. Recalling something important, he reminded himself that he truly cherished the life he was currently living. This time, I will protect them. As night fell in another location, the butcher quickly took count of the people present. Longhair calmly reported the situation to him, noting a herd of about 10 with one juvenile. Surprised, he asked if they could capture it. Longhair shook his head helplessly, explaining that they never left the herd, making capture difficult. The butcher's expression soured as he realized their prey was becoming scarce. Longhair also suggested they find a way to hunt those larger beasts, then continued as another thought occurred to him. His next words caught the butcher by surprise. "I spotted some people while scouting," the butcher quickly asked. "People?" Longhair nodded firmly. "3 children." This news left the butcher stunned until a cruel smile crept across Longhair's face as he added, "And one is a girl." This piqued the butcher's interest, and he let out a laugh. It seemed Curie had no idea of the terrible fate that awaited her. Late that night in the tribal hut, a heavy silence fell over everyone after they heard Rong Yu's story. Every face was clouded with deep thought, and the village elder seemed lost in his own reflections. After a long silence, Yan finally asked why humans would kill their own kind. Rong Yu suddenly recalled his past knowledge of case number 9XN906, which took place at a small tavern managed by the victim. At 3:00 p.m., the defendant murdered the victim with sleeping pills for financial gain before dismembering the body. The victim had previously suffered from paranoia. Driven by hallucinations and rage, the defendant suffered from a mental disorder. Another case involved a woman who poisoned her lover's husband because of their affair. After enduring constant sexual abuse, the defendant conspired with her mother to stab the victim in the heart while he slept. Recalling something, the mother spoke up in surprise. "Are Sue's mother and sister all right?" The elder turned to answer, explaining that they would only be captured alive since they still had value. After speaking, the elder comforted Rong Yu, telling him not to worry as they would be safe, though this only made another woman feel more anxious. "But if they are coming to take people, won't they find us here?" Wu asked, her face filled with concern. "Does that mean we might be killed or taken away too?" The woman nodded in confirmation, admitting it was a possibility. The man with the buzz cut then turned to the village elder to seek his opinion. "Should we relocate elsewhere just to be safe?" Jiang immediately shook his head in disagreement, stating that it wasn't a good idea. The elder seemed to be searching for a better solution, noting that moving the entire village wasn't something they could do instantly. With a firm expression, he added that human settlements always left traces behind. Those words caused everyone present to fall silent instantly. Remembering something, the elder turned to Rong Yu and asked, "Su, how many of them are there?" Curie quickly translated for the village elder and the crowd, explaining that their numbers were far greater than those gathered here. Rong Yu remained seated in silence, his anxiety mounting as he wondered if they would track them down to seize the women once more. Haunted by memories of their past slaughters, he shook his head in a fit of helplessness, refusing to accept such a fate. Sensing his inner turmoil, the elder offered a gentle smile and a comforting gaze, telling him not to let such agonizing thoughts consume him. He assured him they wouldn't be found so easily before standing up to tell the exhausted group that the day had been long enough. As the others retired to their tents, Rong Yu lay awake, plagued by visions of an attack where the men were slain and the women were dragged away. He cycled through various grim scenarios of an ambush on the village until a sudden realization caused his expression to turn solemn. He bolted upright, drawing the attention of those nearby, while Curie watched in bewilderment as he suddenly dashed outside. Just as Curie wondered where he was headed, Rong Yu let out a thunderous warning that jolted everyone from their sleep in a state of confusion. They frantically asked what was happening as the scene shifted to the following morning, where a long-haired man was assessing the situation. The blue-faced men examined the tracks left in the snow, confirming their suspicions as they discussed the footprints they had found. Deducing that the small prints belonged to children, the long-haired man pointed toward the direction they headed, and the group pressed on. Everyone remained on high alert until the long-haired man suddenly raised his hand to halt the group after scouting the path ahead. His startled companions questioned the sudden stop, but his expression grew grim as he listened intently to a faint noise in the distance. The blue-faced warriors charged toward the source of the sound, which turned out to be the frantic lowing of trapped cattle. They were stunned to find a cow stuck in a pit, looking around in confusion and wondering how the animal could have fallen into such a spot. The long-haired man realized this was no accident, his gaze turning cold as he concluded that someone had intentionally dug the trap. When the bald man asked for the reason, he sighed and pointed at the beast, declaring it was a way to capture prey without any exertion. The blue-faced men looked on with ugly expressions of shock, prompting the long-haired man to issue his orders immediately. He commanded 2 of them to return to the village to inform the chief and lead the rest of the tribe to their current location. He pointed forward as if giving an order for the rest to follow him and continue hunting the children, and though they were reluctant, they eventually agreed. Both sides immediately set to work as Long Hair moved ahead to scout the area, while the blue-faced group was now down to only 4 men. Sensing something was wrong, Hitler quickly turned back to report their location, and they stared in surprise at the footprints on the ground. There were many adult footprints nearby, suggesting they were close, so they continued exploring forward until Long Hair suddenly noticed something. He realized the scene ahead was in ruins and declared they had found it, as the shelters there appeared to have collapsed some time ago. He laughed at the spoiled fruit on the ground and smugly asked if they saw that, wondering if they had abandoned their food to flee just as an arrow struck. Long Hair was struck by the arrow before he could even notice it, leaving both him and Hitler startled as they looked up in shock. Rong Yu and the others were launching an ambush from the side, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he thought to himself that the plan had succeeded. Realizing they were being ambushed made the blue-faced men look furious, while Rong Yu gritted his teeth in determination despite his hands trembling. Seeing the situation turn bad, the blue-faced men turned and fled, which made the crew-cut man angrily demand why they weren't shooting while the enemy escaped. Yan quickly turned to signal the others that they were fleeing toward the forest and ordered a pursuit, so everyone grabbed their weapons and chased after them. Rong Yu gritted his teeth in anger during the chase, as the scene shifted back to the previous night when he was signaling the group. Curie stood by his side, translating intently, explaining that the enemy was here but would not launch a massive assault all at once, perfectly conveying his thoughts. He explained that if they attacked, it would involve scouting first followed by a 2-stage assault, leaving everyone deep in thought. He suggested they quietly investigate first, since the scouts likely wouldn't be numerous, and Rong Yu instinctively clenched his fists. Curie surprised the group by adding that they would capture that small scouting party, while he continued to look at everyone. He gestured toward Lip and the members of the other tribes, and she interpreted his meaning, telling the mothers to take the children and the elderly. They were to bring as much food as possible and hide at the uncle's house, which startled Lip, while Curie continued explaining Rong Yu's plan for the rest to stay and fight. Rong Yu clenched his fist decisively, as she added that victory was certain if they prepared well, prompting everyone to nod in serious agreement. Rong Yu sprinted forward with eyes full of hatred, determined to kill them as he recalled the face of that butcher, the enemy who had murdered his family. This was not murder, which only breeds hatred, but a struggle for survival. Meanwhile, Buzzcut and the others grew anxious and called out, wondering where he had disappeared. The long pursuit had gradually drained Rong Yu's strength, but suddenly a strange footstep appeared, and he sensed that something was wrong. Fortunately, he managed to evade the attack just in time, causing the long-haired man to flee forward in a desperate rush. Yan refused to be left behind and chased after him with the others, while Rong Yu slowly aimed his arrow at the man as he observed the situation. The long-haired man turned back in surprise, but before he could react, an arrow pierced through him, and he fell violently to the ground in agony. Buzzcut and Yan rushed forward to subdue him, shouting for him to stay still, and some time passed at that spot. The wicked men finally paid for their crimes with their lives, and as the long-haired man sat bound on the ground, Buzzcut interrogated him with irritation. "Speak, why did you kill this child's family?" He looked up in shock at the mention of family, while Curie angrily accused him of murdering Sway's men and kidnapping his mother and sister, demanding an explanation. Hearing this, the long-haired man seemed to understand something and muttered, "Aha, family," before looking at Rong Yu with a judgmental stare. "Strangers cannot be family," he added with a cruel expression, claiming only women could create a bloodline, words that incensed Rong Yu as he recalled a certain memory. The villainous long-haired man laughed with delight, boasting that he had marked the entire path leading there as he continued to voice various threats. "The others will find this place and kill you all," he said with a hint of madness, claiming they would seize all the women because they were. Before he could finish his sentence, an enraged Rong Yu thrust a spear through his body, forcing the long-haired man to grit his teeth against the intense pain. His eyes remained cold and seemingly indifferent as evening approached, and the tents were moved to the base of the mountain. The tribal women sat there with sorrowful expressions, while the chief stood nearby, gritting his teeth in restless anxiety as a long time passed. He repeatedly asked if they had returned yet and wondered if something was wrong, while the village elder nearby could not hide his own apprehension. Ultimately, the elder could only sigh and tell everyone to keep waiting since the appointed time had not yet come, even as the moon rose and familiar footsteps approached. After inspecting the ropes tied to the branches, the blue-faced subordinates quickly reported the location, which greatly infuriated the butcher. They gripped their weapons and hurried forward until they finally discovered the abandoned tents in the area. One of the subordinates quickly spoke up about the bloodstains and pointed to another mark on a high branch, noting that there were traces there as well. This sight made the butcher feel incredibly uneasy, as the surrounding crowd quickly shifted into a combat-ready state, while Rong Yu led his group further ahead to continue their search. Everyone's expression turned solemn, but Rong Yu appeared the most serious of all as several pale-faced men spotted the group ahead and hurriedly gestured toward them. Seeing the situation, the butcher quickly stepped forward, only for the following sight to make his eyes widen in complete disbelief. Before him hung the corpses of two comrades, suspended in the air, marking the first time the butcher had ever felt so deeply insulted. He gritted his teeth, struggling to maintain his composure, while Baozi tied red strings to the trees and asked with a bewildered look if this was the right spot. Curie nodded in agreement to confirm the location as the sun rose high, while Ding Tu and Yan Mayan exerted all their strength to pull the rope upward. Once the bodies were fully hoisted, Rong Yu quickly covered Curie's eyes to shield her from the trauma, while Ru Qin warned the group that the enemy would surely be driven into a frenzy. Everyone nodded in agreement and began discussing how the enemy would hunt them down, concluding that they should hide the corpses to prevent them from being found. This left Ding Tu and the others in deep thought until Rong Yu suddenly stepped forward to stop them, with Curie explaining that hiding the bodies would only make them look cowardly. He seemed to be considering a deeper strategy, realizing that even if the bodies were hidden, the enemy would eventually find them and come to kill them regardless. Instead, they would be the ones to instill fear in their enemies. And as Rong Yu pointed toward the ground, everyone followed his gaze with confused expressions. Corpses were now piled high upon the ground as Curie's gaze turned serious, telling those around her that they were strong enough to easily defeat their enemies like this. This was the very scene the butcher was witnessing, causing him to grit his teeth in frustration while his subordinates rushed to take the bodies down. The butcher's hands trembled as he slowly reached toward Chang Fa, tears streaming down his face in utter helplessness as he tightly embraced the corpse and wept. Under the high moon, the butcher coldly uttered a command to kill them all, his uncontrollable rage fueled by the memory of everything that had transpired. He vowed to find and slaughter every single person who had murdered their kin, leaving his subordinates lost in their own thoughts. Noticing the expressions of the crowd, the butcher was taken aback just as an old woman appeared and remarked that his plan might not be a good idea. He stared at the old woman in confusion as she remained silent for a moment before sharing her premonitions, noting that they had never faced such a situation before. Their past opponents had always been weaker and fewer in number, and it seemed she sensed that the current situation had changed for the worse. Her words silenced the butcher instantly as the old woman gestured toward the corpses, stating they had no idea who killed their kin, how many there were, or how powerful they might be. It appeared she possessed extensive experience in such matters, suggesting the enemy might be far more numerous and powerful than them. Hearing this, the surrounding subordinates exchanged glances filled with terror. The butcher stood to the side, observing in silence. This time even he felt a sense of unease, of fear and dread born from the unknown. He recalled the tragic deaths of his comrades, realizing they had no idea how many enemies there were. The old woman's voice continued to echo, speaking of how brutal their leader truly was. Although he was enraged by his comrades' deaths, the butcher could do nothing. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky and struck the ground with immense force. The thunderous sound startled the butcher, causing him to drop to the ground and cover his head. He wasn't alone, as his nearby subordinates also clutched their heads in sheer terror. He remained huddled in a corner, clutching his head in a pathetic display. Sweat poured down the butcher's face until falling snowflakes prompted him to suddenly look up. For some reason, snow began to fall from the sky once more. Overcome with surprise, the butcher looked ahead to see that the dark sky had undergone a transformation, leaving even his subordinates bewildered. Still confused and unsure of what was happening, the butcher regained his composure and slammed his staff violently against the ground. He announced to everyone present that they were going home, then ordered his men to carry the bodies of their fallen comrades back with them. The scene shifted elsewhere, where Manhwa anxiously peered outside, wondering why they were taking so long to return. Everyone there grew deeply contemplative, realizing that waiting any longer would be too dangerous, and deciding they should set out first. Manhwa continued to look back, searching for the others, and upon spotting familiar figures approaching, he shouted out in joy. Rong Yu and Curie smiled and waved, prompting Moi to rush toward them. Once he confirmed they were both safe, tears began to stream down his face. He asked why they were so late and admitted how worried he had been. Seeing the children so close, the others laughed happily. Meanwhile, a freezing snow began to fall from the sky. The dark sky grew even gloomier as the scene returned to the butcher's camp. The 3 slain bodies had finally been buried, and he stood before their graves, consumed by rage. With rage and a fear of us in his heart, he watched as we moved on. Time passed, and by the following day, everyone continued their journey along the road. Rong Yu began the migration with the others, moving in search of a better place while trying to envision a brighter future, one step at a time. Gradually, more people gathered there, and as their numbers grew, they continued to share their food, which brought a sense of warmth to Rong Yu. It was wonderful to see everyone dancing excitedly around a grand feast after so long. Then, on a day when the rain poured down in torrents, those inside the tents were still confused by the heavy downpour. Rong Yu quickly approached Curie and asked what he was looking at. Curie announced with a smile that it was raining, and he stepped outside in surprise, wondering if it was truly rain. By now, he had grown into a very powerful young man. A faint smile touched his lips as he realized he had matured amidst the falling rain, and Rong Yu walked out with Curie to watch the heavy downpour. He and his wife smiled and waved as he returned to the 2 wolves circling them, and he asked curiously about the state of the storage after seeing his hard work. He nodded quickly and replied that it was fine and as cold as ever, but his expression suddenly turned serious as he mentioned there was a problem. Flashing back to the time right after they escaped those men, the image of the butcher haunted his memory and left them feeling constantly uneasy. Everyone continued their lives by camping along the riverbank, huddling around the fire while realizing that those creatures feared them just as much as they feared the creatures. The bearded man asked with a hint of worry if the plan was going well, and the village elder nodded in agreement. They could only hope for the plan to proceed smoothly, a thought that left everyone, including Rong Yu, in a state of deep reflection. Every day was filled with endless contemplation as he often questioned his own existence, wondering why he was there and who he truly was. Rong Yu frequently approached the water to observe, prompting Curie to ask if he saw anything, while his focused gaze on the river ice surprised Bao Zi. Realizing the fish beneath the ice were their food reserves, they confirmed the sighting and hurriedly used a stick to break a small hole. Rong Yu continued his fishing and showed the catch to the adults, earning a gentle pat on the head and praise from Buzzcott for his good work. As evening arrived, everyone enjoyed a meal of grilled fish together happily, and the village elder turned toward Rong Yu with a smile. Those men did not appear as the days passed, suggesting Sui's plan had succeeded, and everyone looked at him with such affection that he smiled bashfully. Time went by, and another peaceful day passed, as Rong Yu walked outside and sat down in quiet contemplation. No one knew what was going through his mind until Curie, standing nearby, asked him in surprise what he was thinking about. She looked up at the sky before Rong Yu suddenly placed a hand on his chest, leading her to ask if he was referring to himself or her. Her face turned pensive as she thought for a moment. Then she pointed at him and said her name was Curie, while he introduced himself as Sui. After speaking, his expression became thoughtful as they both looked up at the starry galaxy above them, and he reaffirmed that he was indeed Sui. Rong Yu wished time would stand still in that place, as his identity mattered little to him compared to the vital task of figuring out how to survive. Seeing that it was getting late, the 2 continued their journey without a second thought. While inside the hut, children played happily, cherishing every moment of their lives. Rong Yu chuckled softly as he picked up the broom, focusing only on the task at hand, just as a heavy downpour suddenly began outside. The noise kept Rong Yu awake, while the children hurried to open the tent flaps to gaze at the sky, exclaiming in surprise that it was actually raining. Unable to hide his astonishment, Rong Yu stepped outside into the rain. Despite the pitch-black sky, he watched as the snow began to melt away. He marveled that it was raining instead of snowing as a sudden chill filled the air, and as time passed, the snow vanished completely. The torrential rain showed no sign of letting up, and inside the hut, the atmosphere grew somber as everyone gathered around the fire with grave expressions. Jai Wu spoke up with a smile, asking if the weather had been getting warmer, prompting the woman beside him to nod in agreement. She noted that the snow on the distant mountain had already melted, her face filled with hope as she wondered if spring was finally arriving. Mayan Yan looked thoughtful, remarking how wonderful that would be, but Rong Yu remained silent, sensing something was amiss as he pondered the rain and the sudden warmth. He suddenly bolted upright, startling those around him with his confusing behavior, and then he ignored the downpour to head back outside. The others watched him anxiously, asking where he was going, but Rong Yu hurried into the storehouse and pointed urgently at their meat reserves. With a grim expression, he spoke to the group, leaving Jai Wu and the buzz-cut man bewildered. But Rong Yu simply picked up a piece of meat to sniff it, his eyes filling with tears of grief. It was truly bizarre, as if the cycle of freezing and thawing was repeating itself, a realization that seemed to dawn on the mother as she watched him. She approached and sniffed the meat herself just as the rain outside ceased, only to discover that very little of their food supply remained unspoiled. The mother helplessly informed the group of their dwindling supplies, leaving the buzz-cut man in shock, while Mai and Yan declared that they would have to go hunting the following day. Rong Yu reached out to catch his attention, and with a look of utmost gravity, he told the startled man that there was something far more urgent than hunting. As time went by, the group watched in silence as the shaggy-haired man struggled to dig through the earth and stone, pausing to ask Squinty if it would truly be warmer underground. Baozi urged them to keep working as they dug a massive pit, noting that everything Sui had predicted so far had turned out to be true. Nearby, the three adults, including the buzz-cut man, remained focused on their digging, while Baozi watched them with a critical and judging gaze. The adults remained silent and kept working, while the shaggy-haired man grumbled as he dug, questioning if these were actually Sui's instructions or if they had come from Curie. He sighed and quickly explained that the idea had come from Sui's mind. Meanwhile, Baozi smiled and chatted with his friends, noting that Sui seemed a bit strange, unable to speak while his mind was flooded with thoughts. Curly Hair stopped working and smiled in praise, noting that the two were a perfect match since Sui was full of thoughts and Curie was able to read them. Everyone burst into laughter and nodded in agreement, but seeing them joking around, Buzz Cut quickly urged them to stay on task. "You must stay focused and work hard while on the job." The older man scolded the youngsters, warning that their playing around would only cause delays. His words prompted them to dive back into digging the earth. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to the previous evening, where Buzz Cut appeared somewhat surprised. There was something that needed to be done before the hunt, and as everyone looked at Dong Wu in confusion, wondering what it could be, she continued to express herself through gestures. Yuri relayed the message to the group about building a storage room, leaving Squinty Eyes and Baozi still bewildered as they asked what a storage room even was. Dong Wu continued to gesture, laughing as she explained that it would be a place neither hot nor cold, neither damp nor dry, which was why they were digging to create a stable environment before the snow began to fall incessantly. Overnight, the snow grew much thicker, prompting Curly Hair and the others to rush outside in worry, his face showing exhaustion from the harsh weather. He stood there in a daze, looking at the holes they had worked so hard to dig now being buried by the snow, wondering what to do now that everything was covered. Seeing the situation, everyone grabbed their tools to clear the snow quickly, and a while later, Curly Hair looked inside the cave with a smile. Fortunately, there was no snow inside, and as the others nodded in agreement, Yan Mayan suddenly suggested that they must find a way to seal the entrance. By the following morning, Buzz Cut couldn't hide his smile as he looked at their progress, noting that it was certainly different inside compared to the outside. Yan Mayan turned his head in confusion and asked, "What?" as the older man gently placed his hand on the ground, his face lighting up with joy. "Anything kept here won't freeze," the older man said before walking toward Dong Wu and praising Sui for coming up with such a brilliant idea. Receiving everyone's praise made him incredibly happy, and soon it was time for the entire group to set out for the hunt. Buzz Cut used a stone to snap small branches while Squinty Eyes and Curly Hair performed their usual duties, and after they brought the wood back, Yan Mayan continued his calculations, and as he picked up a piece of wood and asked if the length was sufficient, Buzz Cut laughed and praised it for being a perfect fit. They quickly wove the branches into a door, and once finished, Buzz Cut laughed with delight as the older man pointed at the sealed entrance, everyone feeling happy with the excellent result. Dong Wu and the others leaned down to inspect the interior of the cave, and Buzz Cut then spoke up, noting that everything was finally complete. "This place needs to be filled, doesn't it?" Over the course of 3 days, the women of the tribe headed out to forage for food. Ermai smiled at a beautiful flower before her, excitedly bringing it to her mother and asking if it was edible. Her mother suddenly took the item and chewed it to test the taste. Consequently, the fruits reserved for the upcoming season were neatly arranged inside the cellar. Meanwhile, the men of the tribe continued their hunt. Mai and Yan quickly signaled for everyone to halt, and seeing this, they followed suit with solemn expressions. He then pointed forward and announced for everyone to look over there. A group of fawns was still searching for food in that area. Aiming for the one in the center, Mai and Yan raised his bow high and pointed it forward. He did not forget to instruct everyone to fire their shots simultaneously. Thus, the arrows flew straight into the poor little fawn. This caused Tumei to laugh with delight and cheer. Everyone then brought the spoils back together, and finally their food reserves began to grow day by day. As was their custom, they continued to hunt. Inside the storage caves, the amount of gathered food seemed to be increasing. As the days passed, everyone carried on with their usual lives around the flickering campfire. Everyone sat gathered there, their faces filled with joy as they enjoyed their meal. Rongwu was gradually becoming more accustomed to this way of life. As the night grew late and the moon rose high in the sky, a pack of wild wolves seemed to catch a scent and began creeping forward step by step. Following behind her were the obedient little pups. This time the mother wolf sensed something, having noticed the food storage cellars nearby. She quickly lowered her head to sniff the ground, while the pup beside her watched the scene with utter confusion. It appeared the mother wolf had discovered the food hidden inside the cellar, and she began to sniff even more intently. At that moment, the pup seemed to notice something and suddenly leaped forward. Sensing danger, the mother wolf hastily let out a warning howl. However, the pup did not listen and continued to run ahead. Inside the tents, everyone was still immersed in a deep slumber. The pup repeatedly scratched at the wooden door. Hearing the strange noise, Rongwu suddenly snapped his eyes open. He sat up and looked outside, wondering what was happening. Realizing something was amiss, Rongwu quickly grabbed his weapon and stepped outside. His face grew pensive as he silently wondered what that noise coming from over there could be. At that moment, he discovered that one of the food storage cellar doors had been forced open, which made Rongwu feel extremely anxious. Inside, the mother wolf and her pup were still eating ravenously. Rongwu risked entering to investigate, noting that something had broken the gate and made its way inside. Witnessing this situation caused him to freeze for a moment, his face filled with disbelief as he muttered, "What? Dogs, or are they wolves?" At the same time, the mother wolf noticed his presence and lunged at him, causing Rongwu to scream in terror. Hearing the cry, the adults in the tribe quickly sat up, and Mayan Yan asked in surprise if they had heard a noise. Spiky Hair asked in surprise if it was just a wild animal, while Rong Yu continued to fend off the mother wolf with a stick. The prospect of fighting the beast alone filled him with dread, making him wonder why no one had come despite his loud cries. He worried his voice couldn't reach the tents as the mother wolf, lured by the smell of food, appeared incredibly menacing. It lunged at him to attack while the adults nearby woke up and looked around suspiciously, debating whether they had misheard the noise as the scene shifted back to the food cellar. Rong Yu used his meager strength to hold back the mother wolf's attack, screaming out in a state of total hopelessness. This caught the attention of the adults, but Sang Chin dismissed the noise and urged everyone to go back to sleep, claiming it was just an animal. Rong Yu remained in a perilous situation, cursing his luck as he stared into the terrifying eyes of the mother wolf. He realized they couldn't understand him because he wasn't speaking clearly, and though his mind was blank, he knew he had to say something. His voice trembled as he struggled to form the words until finally, Rong Yu used every bit of his strength to scream, "Wolf." That single word made everyone turn in shock as the wolf closed in on the trembling Rong Yu, who let out another desperate cry. An arrow was released just in time, and fortunately, Spiky Hair managed to strike the mother wolf with a stone at the most critical moment. The beast retreated in pain, allowing Rong Yu to snap out of his shock as Spiky Hair urgently told him to run outside. Seeing his chance, he didn't hesitate to rush out of the cellar and finally appeared before the others. Everyone nearby was stunned. "Rui, what? Is it really you?" Tears streamed down Rong Yu's face. Fully and the others rushed over to check on him, asking if he was hurt or if there was a wolf inside as the scene shifted. Buzzcut continued his assault on the wolf, while the others watched anxiously before grabbing their weapons and charging in. Rong Yu waited outside with the children until the mother wolf and her cub were finally brought out. Buzzcut irritably tossed the mother wolf's carcass onto the ground, declaring it over, which allowed the women to finally breathe a sigh of relief. Mo Yan raised his spear to kill the cub, but Rong Yu signaled for him to stop, leaving him looking quite bewildered by the gesture. Rong Yu remained firm in his intervention, and though surprised, Mo Yan eventually nodded and released the small wolf before the scene shifted to the next morning. The children were overjoyed by the sight, and even Rong Yu and his two companions shared in the excitement. As the cub continued to howl, Rong Yu gently reached out to it while the adults watched them with lingering concern as he signaled the animal. He signaled that he wouldn't harm it, but the cub remained hostile until he quickly tossed a piece of meat in front of it, triggering its instinctive suspicion. Rong Yu laughed and urged it to eat, prompting the wolf to quickly snatch the meat into its mouth. The onlookers marveled at the sight of it eating, and as everything went according to plan, Rong Yu smiled while the cub completely forgot the previous day's events. On a typical pleasant day, Rong Yu watched the children playing with the young wolf and smiled with great satisfaction. Nearby, the boy continued to play with the cub, whose presence brought immense joy to all the children in the area. Suddenly, Rong Yu grew strangely pensive as he recalled the night he fought the mother wolf, realizing that was the moment he had regained his speech. He wondered if the dire situation had awakened his instincts, and as he muttered the word wolf, he sighed while contemplating the local language. Various concepts flooded his mind as he placed a hand on his chest and stammered, "I am here," before the scene shifted back to late that night inside the tent. Everyone was gathered together as the children excitedly felt the cub's thick fur, marveling at how soft it was. Rong Yu laughed at how adorable the children were, while Jia Ling watched in surprise, and the bearded man asked a confused question. "This cub is strange. It doesn't even try to run back to the forest," he remarked, to which the young woman laughed and suggested it simply liked humans. Ermai smiled and chatted about how they were the ones feeding it, while the mother laughed heartily in agreement after a moment of reflection. Jia Lan soon announced that the creature would likely only stay for a short while, seemingly anticipating trouble, as humans and animals each have their own place in the world. Jia Lan's eyes filled with deep suspicion, as he had never heard of or seen two different species living together. Before turning his gaze back toward the wolf pup, Rong Yu stammered about a family, and Jia Lan slowly lifted the pup into his hands to inspect it as everyone finally shared a happy smile. Bao Zai stood by feeling confused about the word family, while others curiously asked what Rong Yu had just said. Jia Lan nodded with a smile and told everyone that whether human or animal, they are family as long as they live together, before suddenly remembering something. The elder turned to Rong Yu and told him he was part of it too, while gently stroking the wolf pup and saying the same applied to the creature. Jia Lan seemed to sense a profound warmth as the scene shifted back to late at night, with everyone falling into a deep slumber once again. Suddenly, the wolf pup rushed over and confused Rong Yu by licking him repeatedly, but he was so tired that he simply held it and went back to sleep. By the next morning, the wolf pup was sniffing through the thick snow and bolted forward, prompting the others to grab their weapons and give chase until they successfully hunted two beasts. Savory meat was roasted over the fire once more, as the pup happily gnawed on a reward bone, while the others eagerly feasted on large portions of meat. Outside, the snow continued to fall relentlessly as Rong Yu and the rest fell into a deep sleep, with the pup approaching him to lick his face as it usually did. He sat up in surprise and looked at its innocent face, but since he was still feeling drowsy, he quickly stepped outside. Seeing the wolf pup walking ahead of him, Rong Yu stood frozen in place, still unable to comprehend what was happening. He was puzzled as the creature kept signaling to him, while continuing to run swiftly toward the distance. It seemed he finally realized something, and stood there dazed for a long time as the wolf pup vanished completely from the area. His eyes were filled with an undeniable sadness as Jia Lan approached to comfort him, telling him not to grieve too much. The elder had seemingly anticipated this, explaining that the creature had simply returned to its original home as they both gazed thoughtfully at the snowy sky. As the landscape was swallowed by white, the bewildered children gathered together. Mop sadly noted the wolf was gone. Maimo sighed over its disappearance, and Curie smiled to comfort them. He explained that it hadn't vanished but had simply gone home, which surprised everyone and filled their eyes with a sense of anticipation. "Going home to where?" she replied with a gentle smile. "I don't know. Hasn't it simply returned to the place where its original family resides?" Rong Yu glanced softly toward Gu Li. He suddenly recalled the family he had when he first arrived in this world, as he had always been alone in his previous life. The thought of an original family left him in a somber, silent contemplation. Just then, the familiar silhouette of the little wolf appeared. This caught everyone's attention in surprise. After Rong Yu stepped outside, Gu Li seemed to have realized something. "Ah, look over there." The little wolf had brought two other pups with it. A joyful smile appeared on Rong Yu's face as the little wolf ran happily toward him. The two of them embraced tightly as if they hadn't met in a long time. Finally, tears of joy streamed down his face. As time passed, the sky continued to pour with rain. Rong Yu stepped forward in surprise and asked what was wrong. As he walked, he looked toward Tu Mei in bewilderment. The three wolf pups had now grown significantly. Tu Mei turned to him and said, "Just come along and you'll see." His mysterious behavior left Rong Yu utterly confused. He kept asking if something was the matter, but Tu Mei simply continued to urge him forward. "Look at this." He quickly approached the large slabs of meat to examine them. Seeing this, Tu Mei asked, "Do you understand?" Rong Yu shook his head thoughtfully, admitting he didn't quite understand. With no other choice, Tu Mei quickly leaned down and pointed. "Look closely, there are cuts right here." He still failed to grasp the meaning. "Didn't we just cut those while eating?" Tu Mei sighed, scanned the area, and informed him. "It's not just one spot. A small piece has been carved out of every single portion of meat here." Upon hearing this, Rong Yu searched the area in shock. "Is it true? Has a bit been cut from every piece?" Realizing something was amiss, he turned back and asked, "Who did this?" The scene then shifted to that evening, which proceeded as usual. Everyone sat there waiting for their meal. Rongyu's gaze turned pensive as he watched the others eating and drinking to their heart's content. Simply being able to eat meat every day made everyone extremely happy. While preparing the meat, Rongyu told the group, "If you need more, just say so. There's plenty of food." This made Mi Yan chuckle with delight. "Is this enough for everyone? With so many people, how can we all possibly eat until we're full?" Those nearby nodded in agreement. "Yeah, that's right. If we want everyone to be completely stuffed, we'll have to go hunting more frequently." And so, they continued to enjoy the delicious meat. As time went by, everyone eventually returned to their tents to prepare for sleep. Rongyu's expression became pensive as he gazed into the fire. Noticing this, Tu Ding approached and asked, "Rongyu, do you have something on your mind?" He didn't know how to properly explain it to the older man. After a moment of reflection, he sighed and shook his head. "It's nothing. I'm just thinking about when to go on the next hunt." His brooding caught Tu Mei's attention. Seeing this, the village elder quickly made an announcement. "We're heading in to rest now," Mi Yan said as he and the others turned to leave. "We'll do the same." He nodded in understanding, then added, "Yes, we'll follow you shortly." Before retiring for the night, Jia Lan gave a cautious reminder. "All right, make sure to extinguish the fire properly before coming in." Rongyu smiled and nodded. "Yes, I will." Gu Li quickly stepped forward like a child and said, "I'm going in first too." Surprised, he followed her and asked, "Do you need me to walk you back?" She smiled, shook her head, and walked away. "It's fine, I can manage on my own." Now only Rongyu and Tu Mu remained in the clearing. Tu Mu asked in surprise, "Why didn't you mention it to the elders earlier?" His expression turned pensive as he struggled to find the right words. After a long silence, he sighed and spoke. "The person who stole the meat might be one of our own." This revelation left Tu Mu completely stunned. "What, are you actually suspecting our own tribesmen?" Rongyu gave a firm nod. Outside, the sky was growing even darker. Gripping his weapon as he walked, Tu Mu questioned, "But if we want to catch the thief, shouldn't we be guarding the storehouse?" Rongyu shook his head and replied seriously, "No, we won't find them that way." This left him utterly confused. "Why?" He continued to voice his thoughts. "Evidence? No, we must find tracks first." Naturally, Tu Mu still didn't understand. "Evidence?" Rongyu kept walking forward. "There will definitely be traces." He kept pressing with questions. "What kind of traces?" His gaze turned thoughtful as he pondered. "Traces of someone secretly roasting the stolen meat somewhere." Finally, he understood what was being said. "Ah, I see." Nearby, the wolf seemed to have discovered something. The wolves quickly turned back to alert the two of them. Seeing this, they hurried in the direction the wolf indicated. Up ahead, a group of people was still busy tending to a fire. This caused the wolves to charge forward aggressively. However, the sight that followed made them stop instantly. Rongyu and Tu Mu froze in place at the scene before them. Mi Yan turned around in surprise and called out. Rui and the others were still there roasting meat. "You're here. Want to join us?" Time seemed to stand still as Rongyu and Tu Mu stood frozen for a moment. The more he thought about it, the angrier Tu Mu became. "This isn't right. How could you sneak out and bring meat here to eat like this?" Hearing this, Mi Yan just laughed and continued grilling. "The meat in the storehouse doesn't belong solely to you." He quickly stepped forward to criticize them. "This is what everyone hunted together. You can't do this." Despite that, Mi Yan refused to admit any wrongdoing and kept retorting, "I took part in the hunt too, so what's the harm in eating like this?" "Right." Rongyu's face grew extremely troubled. At the same time, Mi Yan turned around and tossed a piece of meat toward them. "Here, you guys eat too." Seeing the delicious meat before them, the wolves hesitated for a moment. Just as they were about to eat, Rongyu suddenly reached out to stop them. "Wait," his gaze became intensely sharp. "Don't eat it, you mustn't." Upon hearing his command, the wolves immediately ceased their actions. Seeing this, Mi Yan gave a forced smile and quickly suggested, "We'll just finish roasting and eating what we've already brought out. Is that all right, since the meat is still fresh? It shouldn't go to waste." Rongyu felt extremely frustrated hearing Mi Yan's words, but there was nothing else he could do. He coldly extended his hand and declared, "Just this once, but never let this happen again." This made the squinty-eyed man feel incredibly smug, as he boasted to the two women that the boy didn't dare say a word because he was a level above him. The two women laughed heartily at this, and seeing no other choice, Rongyu and Tu Mei immediately headed back. On the way, he constantly criticized him, saying he should have been more assertive, before suddenly remembering something and making a quick suggestion. He offered to speak to the elders on his behalf, but after a moment of reflection, Rongyu shook his head and declined, choosing to leave things as they were for now. He mentioned he would speak up later if more issues arose, as he seemingly had another plan in mind. And in the blink of an eye, the next morning arrived. Everyone had gathered there with looks of utter confusion, wondering why they had been summoned and what was going on. Rongyu smiled and asked if everyone had slept well, leaving them bewildered before he got straight to the point about establishing village rules for everyone to follow. Naturally, these confusing words left the crowd puzzled about the concept of rules, while the squinty-eyed man looked irritated as wrong use stared him down. This video concludes here. If you enjoyed this, please remember to hit the like button to support the channel. Thank you and goodbye, everyone.